in her old chambers, saying, "If you're coming home, you may as well do it properly." It had been so long since she'd truly felt at home, and now, standing on the threshold of the room where she'd spent so many of her childhood nights, an unexpected wave of nostalgia swept over her. The room looked much the same as it had when she was a girl, simple but welcoming, with furs draped over the bed and tapestries lining the walls to keep the northern chill at bay. There was a small window overlooking the courtyard, where she had once watched her brothers spar and ride, back when Winterfell had felt like the center of the world. So much had changed since then, but the warmth of Winterfell, that deep sense of home, was irreplaceable. It was more than the stone walls or the hearth fires, it was the memories, the spirit of the place, and the people who filled it with life. She smiled softly as she traced her fingers over the worn wood of the bedpost. Roslyn had been right, this was home, in every sense of the word. Despite the years that had passed and the miles she had traveled, this place still held the essence of who she was. The comfort and safety that Winterfell offered were unlike anything she had found elsewhere, even in the grand halls of Casterly Rock. Sansa had worked hard to bring some of that same warmth to her new life at the Rock, determined to make it a place where her son, Daemon, could feel the same sense of belonging that she had once known in Winterfell. The towering, golden fortress had been cold and imposing when she had first arrived, its stone halls filled with echoes of power and wealth but lacking the heart that made a place truly home. It had taken time, patience, and her own quiet strength to begin to soften its edges. She had filled it with light where she could, hanging new tapestries and adding northern touches that reminded her of Winterfell, sturdy furs, soft wool blankets, and even a few tapestries. Sansa wanted Daemon to grow up loving Casterly Rock as much as she had once loved Winterfell. She wanted him to feel connected to it, to long for its embrace when he was away, just as she had longed for Winterfell during those lonely days in King's Landing. And yet, no matter how much warmth she poured into her life at the Rock, there was something about Winterfell that could never be replicated. It was a place of memory, of love and loss, of innocence and survival. It was the place where she had learned what it meant to be a Stark, and no matter how far her life had taken her, or how different she had become, Winterfell would always be part of her. As she sat on the edge of the bed, Sansa allowed herself a moment to breathe, to take in the weight of everything that had led her back here. She wasn't the girl she had once been, the wide-eyed, innocent child who had dreamed of knights and songs. She was a woman now, a mother, a wife, and a survivor of more than most could ever imagine. The burdens she carried were heavy, but sitting here, in the warmth of her childhood room, she felt a small piece of herself begin to heal. Daemon, too, was a part of this healing. Watching him grow, seeing the way his eyes lit up when he talked about dragons or laughed with Torrhen, reminded her that despite everything she had lost, there was still so much to be grateful for. He was her future, her light, and she would do everything in her power to give him a childhood filled with love, warmth, and the sense of belonging that Winterfell had given her. The night outside deepened, and the chill of the northern air pressed against the windowpanes, but Sansa felt only warmth in her heart. Here, in the home of her youth, surrounded by the people she loved, she could let her guard down, if only for a little while. Winterfell had a way of doing that, of reminding her that she was not just a Lannister by marriage, or a lady of a distant castle. She was Sansa Stark, of Winterfell. And no matter where the winds of fate blew her, that would never change. Tyrion entered the chamber a little while later, his footsteps soft against the stone floor. They hadn't shared chambers since their time in the capital. In Casterly Rock they kept to the separate lords' and ladies' quarters. But in Winterfell, necessity had brought them together again. He tossed a small bundle of letters onto the bed with a weary sigh, then moved to loosen his boots, his face thoughtful, as if the day's burdens were heavier than usual. "Is there much news?" Sansa asked, setting aside her embroidery, a gift for Arya. She stood up and crossed the room, gently lifting the letters from the bed to inspect them. She had grown accustomed to these moments between them. Years ago, Tyrion had begun confiding in her, first small details of his day, then stories of his past, and soon enough, his deepest plans and worries. They weren't lovers, their marriage had never been consummated, but they had become friends, partners, and more importantly, they had become good parents to Daemon. Tyrion glanced at her with a faint, tired smile. "A letter from my father," he said, his voice dry with its usual hint of sardonic humor. King Tommen and Queen Margaery are happy to announce that the Queen has entered the 6th moon of her pregnancy. And they are even happier to inform us all that she is expecting twins. Sansa blinked in surprise, her hand pausing on the edge of one of the letters. Twins. She repeated, and her thoughts immediately drifted to the young boy Tommen had been, now a king. She pictured him, still so young in her memory, now with the weight of the crown upon his head and soon to be a father of not one, but 2 children. I suppose congratulations are in order. But even as she said it, there was a touch of something bittersweet in her tone. Life had moved on for all of them in so many different ways. Tyrion's lips quirked into a smirk, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Indeed. He knew all too well what it meant to grow up under his father's thumb, and the burden that would await those children, even if they never asked for it. Tyrion sighed as he settled into the chair near the hearth, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He's threatened us with another visit to the Rock if we don't bring Daemon to King's Landing soon, he said, his voice tinged with irritation. Apparently, we're denying him a relationship with his grandson, the future Lord of Casterly Rock. Sansa paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she absorbed Tyrion's words. Tyrion's father cast a long shadow over their lives. The man who ruled the realm with an iron fist, lived to Sansa now only in letters from King's Landing. Sansa lowered herself beside Tyrion, the soft rustle of her gown barely audible against the quiet crackle of the fire. The light flickered across her face, casting long shadows, but her expression remained unyielding, her eyes dark with worry. Tywin's demands echoed in her mind, and the weight of them pressed down on her, as heavy as any crown. Daemon is only a child, she said softly but with steel in her voice. I won't have him paraded around King's Landing like a trophy for the Lannisters to show off. She paused, uncertainty gripping her, but she knew she had to speak. If she couldn't be honest with Tyrion, the man who had stood beside her through everything, then she would never be able to say the words aloud. Her throat tightened as she hesitated, but she pressed on. I don't want him around Cersei. Sansa's voice was quieter now, laced with fear. If anyone will figure out who he is, it's her. Tyrion stilled, his gaze fixed on her. His silence made her heart race, and for a moment, she feared she had gone too far, voiced her deepest concern too openly. She could see the tension in his face, the way his fingers curled slightly as if in some effort to control the frustration he surely felt. But when he spoke, his tone was calm, though his words carried a quiet, unmistakable edge of defiance. Who he is, Sansa, he said carefully, is my son. And nothing will change that. Not Cersei, not my father, not anyone. Sansa smiled softly and gave Tyrion's hand a reassuring squeeze. She could feel the weight of his thoughts before he even spoke, the hesitation in his grip telling her that what was coming next was not going to be simple. And what about her? Sansa asked, her voice quiet but steady. Is there any news? Tyrion paused for a moment, his eyes flickering with the knowledge he carried. He shifted slightly, as if weighing how much to reveal. Varys says she grows restless, he began, his voice low. Daenerys is tired of waiting. She wants to strike now, to press her claim, but Varys is having a hard time convincing her to hold back, to be patient. She's eager, maybe too eager. Sansa's brow furrowed as Tyrion spoke of Daenerys Targaryen. The name carried with it the weight of a storm, one that could reshape the world. Sansa had known from the moment she'd first heard of Daenerys that this was no ordinary queen. She thought back to the day she had found Varys' first letter, urgently summoning Tyrion to Meereen to meet the Dragon Queen. A year had passed before Tyrion finally confided in her that he had been in secret contact with Daenerys, weighing the possibilities of her claim to the Iron Throne. Tyrion had told her about the silver-haired queen, a girl who had been forged into a conqueror across the narrow sea. Sansa imagined her, Daenerys, born in exile, growing from a frightened child into a ruler who commanded armies and dragons alike. She had freed slaves across Essos, leaving a trail of cities in her wake that whispered her name as if it were a prayer. Now she ruled from Meereen, where she sat as queen, not only in title but in the hearts of the people she had liberated. When Tyrion first revealed these conversations to Sansa, his loyalty had still wavered. He had been torn between his duty to the family that despised him and the growing knowledge that Tommen, while good-hearted, was not truly the king. Everyone knew Tywin Lannister ruled in all but name. And when Tywin's time came, The real danger was clear: Cersei would seize control. Tyrion's loyalty to Tommen, the sweet boy who had always shown him kindness, was tested by the dark future looming over the Lannisters. But everything changed when Daemon was born. Tyrion had grown restless, his sharp mind turning constantly toward the precarious balance of power in Westeros. 1 year after Daemon's birth, he left for Meereen under the pretense of negotiating trade talks between Westeros and the city. Sansa remembered the anxiety that filled her in the months of his absence, the uncertainty of what he would find there. When he returned, he was no longer conflicted. The talks had failed, as they were always meant to. But Tyrion had returned with one undeniable truth: Daenerys Targaryen was the rightful queen. She was the one who could bring down the Lannisters and end the cycle of violence and cruelty that plagued the realm. "It is time for my family to fall," he had whispered to Sansa in the quiet of the library after returning from Meereen. The words had chilled her. Tyrion, who had fought so hard to survive his father's scorn, was now prepared to see the Lannister dynasty toppled. Sansa had seen the look in his eyes, one that told her he wasn't turning back. In the 3 years that had passed since Tyrion's secret trip, much had changed. He acted as Daenerys' unseen advisor within Westeros, a silent player moving pieces on the board while Varys remained at her side, serving her directly. Daenerys' impatience had grown. She was a conqueror by nature, and every moment spent waiting felt like a delay in her destiny. She wanted to strike, to take King's Landing and claim the Iron Throne as her birthright. But Tyrion had urged her to be cautious. The game was not yet won. There were whispers of Stannis Baratheon gathering men once more, and it would be folly to bring down the Lannisters only to leave the realm vulnerable to another claimant. Striking at the wrong time could be disastrous. Sansa knew the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Tyrion's position was precarious, walking the fine line between serving the realm and protecting his small family. He was working from within the Lannister web of power, while subtly shifting allegiances in favor of Daenerys. Sansa had watched him do it, marveling at his ability to weave between loyalty and rebellion without ever fully revealing his hand. Yet, Sansa's heart still wavered when it came to Daemon. He was the future lord of Casterly Rock, the only son of Tyrion Lannister, and now she feared for him. If Daenerys were to succeed in her conquest, what would that mean for their son? He had Lannister blood, but he was no enemy to the dragons. Sansa wanted to believe that Daenerys would see that she would spare them when the time came, but the future was full of uncertainty. Tyrion had often told her that Daenerys was different, that she wasn't like the rulers who had come before. But power changed people, and once she set her eyes on the Iron Throne, Sansa feared that the Dragon Queen might not stop until every Lannister was dead. Still, Tyrion was right about one thing: Tommen's reign was a lie built on the ashes of Robert Baratheon and the schemes of Tywin Lannister. The real power was in the hands of those pulling the strings behind the scenes, those like Tywin, like Cersei. And soon, Daenerys would arrive to pull those strings herself, her dragons casting shadows over the world Sansa had known for so long. But as much as she feared the unknown, Sansa had come to trust Tyrion. He was cunning, yes, but he was also kind. He had protected her in King's Landing, and now they protected each other. If there was a way through the chaos ahead, she believed Tyrion would find it. Tyrion's gaze was distant, his mind already calculating the risks, the strategies. "I need to speak with your brother, see where his head is. Robb will be crucial in all this. The North is strong, and if they rally behind Daenerys, others will follow. But I need to know if he'll bend the knee to a Targaryen." "Wait until after the wedding," Sansa advised gently, her voice calm. "Let this time be about family, about peace, if only for a few days. You know how he is. Robb doesn't make decisions lightly, and rushing him will only make him more cautious." Tyrion nodded, but his brow was still furrowed. Sansa could tell the burden of this choice weighed heavily on him. "Robb has no love for the Lannisters," she continued. "He would never align himself with them if he thought there was a better option, not after everything that's happened. But if he sees Daenerys as a safer option for his family, for the North, he'll support her. All you need to do is show him that she's the better path forward, that her fight is the one that offers the most hope for his people." Sansa's words hung in the air between them, and she could see Tyrion's mind turning, the wheels of strategy already beginning to grind. Convincing Robb wouldn't be easy. He was fiercely independent, protective of his land and his people, but she believed it could be done. And if Tyrion, with his sharp mind and clever tongue, could persuade her brother, then the tides of war might shift dramatically. Daenerys offers something the Lannisters never will, Sansa added, her tone thoughtful. Change. A new beginning. If Robb thinks there's a chance for peace, for rebuilding the North without the South's games, he'll consider it. But Tyrion. She hesitated for a heartbeat, knowing the next part was more dangerous than any plan they'd spoken of before. If Robb chooses to back Daenerys, he'll need to trust her. And that trust can't be betrayed. If she wants the North, she has to prove she's more than just fire and fury. She has to be someone they can follow. Tyrion leaned back, his expression contemplative. Daenerys has the dragons. She has the armies. But what she doesn't have is the realm's loyalty, not yet. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Convincing Robb is just the first step. But you're right. He'll be key. If he stands with her, others will fall in line. Sansa's hand lingered on his, offering him a steadying presence. Then wait, she said, her voice soft but resolute. After Arya's wedding, we'll have time to think, to plan. Robb is a Stark. He's seen too much betrayal to rush into anything, but you know him. If you speak to him as a friend, as a brother-in-law, not as a Lannister, you might be able to make him see the bigger picture. Tyrion looked at her, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. You're cleverer than people give you credit for, you know that. Sansa smiled slightly, her gaze unwavering. I had a good teacher. Early the next morning, Sansa decided to take a walk through the familiar grounds of Winterfell with Daemon. It hadn't been easy to pull him away from Torrhen, but her father, Ned, had stepped in. I need Torrhen for some Lord of Winterfell business, he'd said with a gentle smile, ushering the boy away. Sansa had noticed how much Ned had changed since his time in King's Landing. The weight of the past still clung to him, but his priorities had shifted. Now, his focus was on his family, his children and grandchildren. He seemed more intent on being present for as long as he could, treasuring the moments they had together. As Sansa and Daemon strolled through the chilly morning air, she began to recount stories of her childhood, of growing up in Winterfell before the world had changed. She spoke of her brothers, her adventures in the castle, and the innocence that had once colored her view of the world. Yet, as much as she tried, she couldn't tell if Daemon was truly listening. He had always been a quiet child, his attention often absorbed by the world around him rather than the words spoken to him. His wide eyes wandered, taking in the towering walls, the dark stone buildings, the swirling banners that adorned Winterfell. When they finally reached the courtyard, Daemon suddenly froze in his tracks. His eyes were locked on something, wide with awe. Sansa followed his gaze and saw what had captured his attention, grey-wined, Robb's direwolf. The wolf had grown even larger than she remembered, watching over the courtyard like a silent sentinel. It struck her just how much time had passed since she had last seen him. The sight of the direwolf stirred something deep within Sansa, an ache that had long been buried. Memories of Lady, her own beloved direwolf, rushed to the surface. She rarely allowed herself to think of Lady anymore, there was too much pain in it, but whenever the thought of her surfaced, it hit her hard. That terrible day, years ago, still haunted her. If Lady had lived, she might still be by Sansa's side now, a fierce protector through all the trials she had faced. Sansa imagined her lying by the fire at Casterly Rock, curled up beside Daemon, watching over them both with those intelligent, loyal eyes. But instead, Lady remained where she had fallen, buried in a shallow grave in the Riverlands, her memory fading with time, forgotten by everyone but Sansa. Sansa was abruptly pulled from her thoughts by the sound of hooves thundering into the courtyard. Two riders arrived at a swift gallop, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they came to a halt. Both riders were cloaked in black, their faces hidden beneath heavy hoods. They dismounted quickly, handing the reins to the stable hands before exchanging a few quiet words. One of them paused, straightened, and looked up. His eyes met Sansa's, and for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. "Jon," she whispered, barely able to believe it. Jon Snow, her half-brother, had grown into someone entirely different from the boy she had once known. His face was shadowed by a thick black beard, and his body had filled out with muscle, far more solid and imposing than he had been when she last saw him 6 years ago. The long years had hardened him, both in spirit and in form, but his eyes, those grey stark eyes, were unmistakable. They held the same warmth and depth she remembered, though they were tempered now with the weight of all he had endured. Without hesitation, John strode toward her, closing the distance between them. When he reached her, he wrapped her in a firm embrace, one that spoke of all the years they had been apart, of all the battles they had fought, and all the hardships they had survived. Sangza clung to him for a moment, the sudden rush of familiarity and family overwhelming her. She hadn't realized just how much she had missed him until now, standing here, reunited after so long. When John pulled away, his eyes swept over her, as if trying to reconcile the memory of his sister with the woman who now stood before him. "Look at you," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I hardly recognized you. You've changed so much. Are you well?" Sangza gave a faint smile in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "As well as I can be," she replied, her voice soft. There was a depth to those words, a weight that John understood better than anyone. They had both been through too much to ever be truly well again, but they had learned to endure. That was what being a Stark meant, enduring. She placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder and turned him slightly toward John. "This is my son, Damon," she said, her voice filling with quiet pride. "Damon, this is your Uncle John." Damon, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, blinked up at John. The boy was still young, perhaps too young to fully grasp the significance of this moment, but there was a curiosity in his gaze. John knelt down to Damon's level, his expression softening as he regarded his nephew. "Hello, Damon," he said kindly, offering a hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Damon, shy but curious, hesitated for only a heartbeat before reaching out and placing his small hand into John's. His fingers, so delicate and new to the world, were dwarfed by John's large, calloused grip, the hand of a man who had spent his life fighting and surviving. Damon looked up at his uncle with wide, uncertain eyes, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "Hello." The word was soft, yet it carried the tentative warmth of a child meeting someone important for the first time. Sangza stood beside them, watching the interaction with a quiet, growing sense of warmth. It was rare for her to feel such moments of peace, but seeing her son, who had grown up amidst so much uncertainty, form this first bond with her brother stirred something deep inside her. It was a fragile connection, but one she desperately wanted to nurture. John rose slowly, his gaze lingering on Damon for a moment longer before turning back to Sangza. "He looks like his father," he said softly, the words almost surprising in their simplicity. The comment caught Sangza off guard. She stiffened, feeling a ripple of something close to panic, though she quickly suppressed it. John didn't know the truth of Damon's birth. John only saw the boy, and what he believed to be a reflection of his father. Sangza let out a slow breath and allowed her gaze to fall upon Damon. She studied his features for a moment, his sandy blonde hair, the curve of his mouth, the sharpness of his eyes. Perhaps he did look like Tyrion. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but laced with an unspoken tension. "He does." "This is Gendry," John said, gesturing to the man standing beside him. "He's my steward at the watch." There was a momentary pause as John's eyes flickered toward Sangza, a brief hesitation crossing his face. "Gendry, this is my sister, Lady Sangza Lannister," he corrected himself, the name slipping awkwardly from his lips. "Lady Lannister." Sangza's heart tightened for a brief moment at the sound of her married name, but she held her composure. She had grown accustomed to it, though it still carried with it the shadow of her past, of everything she had endured. Forcing a gracious smile, she inclined her head slightly as Gendry stepped forward to greet her. "My lady," Gendry said, bowing his head respectfully. Sangza took a moment to study the man before her. He was equally as muscular as John, perhaps even more so. His build was the kind that came from years of hard labor, not just the training of a soldier. His black hair was tied back in a simple bun, and a dark stubble lined his jaw, giving him a rough-hewn, yet somehow noble appearance. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, piercing blue, bright against the ruggedness of his face. For a fleeting second, Sangza thought she recognized him, though she couldn't place from where. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Gendry," Sansa said warmly, offering him a polite nod, the formality of her words slipping easily from her lips, as was expected of her. Gendry's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort passing through his eyes. He shifted slightly on his feet before speaking, his voice low and humble. "Just Gendry, my lady," he corrected gently. "I'm no knight." There was a sincerity in his tone that caught Sansa off guard. His humility, his grounded nature, stood in stark contrast to the many lords and knights she had known over the years. It was clear that Gendry was a man who hadn't sought titles or glory, but had earned his place through sheer hard work and loyalty. There was something refreshing about that, something familiar. "Well then, just Gendry," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I'm honored to meet you nonetheless." Gendry gave a humble nod, his piercing blue eyes briefly meeting Sansa's before flicking downward, as though uncomfortable with the weight of her gaze. His humility was palpable, a stark contrast to the men of power and status she had grown accustomed to dealing with in her years at court. Jon cleared his throat, breaking the brief silence. "Right then," he said with a hint of warmth in his voice. "We should go see our hosts." He glanced down at Daemon, who had been watching the interaction quietly. "Daemon, may I borrow your mother for a while? I could use her company to escort me to the Great Hall." Daemon blinked up at Jon, his face soft with curiosity, and then looked to Sansa, as if seeking her permission. Sansa smiled at her son and gently ruffled his hair, reassuring him. "You can come too, sweeterling," she said softly. Daemon gave a small, understanding nod, clearly still in awe of his uncle. Jon held out his arm to Sansa, a gesture both courteous and familiar. Sansa, with a light smile, looped her arm through his. For a moment, she felt the comfort of old bonds, of family that had endured so much, now walking together through the ancient halls of their childhood home. Together, they turned toward the Great Hall, leaving behind the courtyard, where winter winds whispered through the stone walls of Winterfell. Chapter 49, Margaery 4. Chapter text. Margaery 4. "And what about this one?" one of Margaery's ladies asked, holding up a delicate nightdress embroidered with the sigils of all the great houses of Westeros. The fabric was soft, expertly stitched, with colors that shimmered in the light of the fire. It was clearly made with great care, each sigil intricately detailed, as if to symbolize the unity of the realm's noble families. "It's lovely," Margaery said with a gracious smile, nodding to her lady-in-waiting. Instantly, the gathered women squealed in delight, exchanging excited whispers amongst themselves. Their laughter and chatter filled the room, but Margaery's smile faltered slightly as she cast a glance toward the ever-growing pile of gifts surrounding her. "As were the last 100," she murmured under her breath, so softly no one but herself could hear. She was seated in her luxurious chambers, adorned with tapestries and bouquets of winter flowers, the scent of roses ever present in the air. Her ladies had spent the better part of the afternoon presenting her with a seemingly endless parade of gifts, all sent from lords and ladies across the Seven Kingdoms after the announcement that she and her husband were expecting twins. It had been a flood of tokens, gowns, blankets, toys, and delicate little trinkets, each more extravagant than the last. The news of twins had sparked a frenzy, and the gifts had not stopped coming. Margaery's smile remained fixed as her ladies continued to coo over each item, their excitement almost contagious. Almost. She couldn't deny the warmth she felt at the thought of her children, the future they represented, but the weight of the attention was beginning to wear on her. So many expectations, so many eyes watching her every move, every gesture. The gifts, though beautiful, had started to blend together in her mind, and she found herself longing for a moment of quiet, away from the constant flurry of admiration. Still, Margaery played her part flawlessly, as she always had. With practiced ease, she reached for the embroidered nightdress and ran her fingers over the intricate stitching. "It's truly beautiful," she said aloud, her voice carrying a warmth that made the ladies smile even brighter. Inside, though, her thoughts drifted elsewhere, toward the life growing within her, toward the future of her children. Beyond the embroidery and the sigils, beyond the whispered alliances and subtle power plays that came with each gift, there were her twins. And they were all that mattered. A knock came at the chamber door, drawing Margaery's attention. She turned to see Tommen standing in the doorway, his presence immediately causing her ladies to drop into deep curtsies, murmuring their respectful "Your Grace." Tommen, now a boy of 17, had grown taller over the years, yet he still carried the round, youthful face of the boy she had married, his innocence lingering despite the weight of the crown he bore. "Apologies, my ladies," the young king said with a gentle smile, his voice warm but still tinged with the politeness of youth. "I've come to steal the queen." Margaery, grateful for the interruption and a momentary reprieve from the endless display of gifts, felt a wave of relief wash over her. She rose gracefully from her chair, her movements fluid and poised, as though the weariness of the day hadn't touched her. Her ladies watched, their voices hushed, as she crossed the room to join her husband. "Of course, Your Grace," she said softly, slipping her arm through his as she joined him at the door. There was a quiet affection between them, a bond they had carefully cultivated over the years, despite the difference in their ages. Though Tommen had matured, there was still a sweetness about him that endeared him to Margaery, and she had always treated him with a gentle kindness, aware of the burdens he carried. As they left the chamber together, Margaery felt the tension of the afternoon begin to ease. She was more than just a queen, more than the figure of admiration and diplomacy, she was, in this moment, simply Tommen's companion. And for that brief escape, she was grateful. "I thought we could take a walk," Tommen said, his tone earnest. "Mother says you need fresh air and exercise for the babe's health." Margaery smiled warmly, hiding her amusement at how dutifully Tommen followed his mother's advice. "What a wonderful idea, Your Grace," she replied, her voice light and affectionate. "And mother also says Qyburn has some new herbs for your tea," Tommen added, as if recalling another instruction. "They are supposed to help with your headaches." "How thoughtful of them," Margaery answered, her expression remaining pleasant, though inwardly, she felt a flicker of discomfort at the mention of Qyburn. He had arrived in King's Landing several years ago, quickly earning Cersea's favor with his unorthodox methods. Cersei trusted him implicitly, and Margaery, ever diplomatic, had initially done the same. When she and Tommen had first begun trying for a child, it was Qyburn who had eagerly offered her various tonics and medicines to aid in conception. He had seemed so certain, and she had wanted to believe in his remedies. But month after month passed with no sign of success. It wasn't until Margaery decided to quietly stop taking the concoctions, without anyone's knowledge, that she had finally conceived. The realization had been both a relief and a quiet suspicion she kept to herself. Now, as she walked with Tommen, her arm linked through his, she felt the weight of those memories, though her smile never wavered. She looked down at her growing belly, where her twins moved within her, and was reminded of what truly mattered. They were healthy, strong, and hers. That was what she focused on now. "Shall we?" she said, nodding toward the gardens, where the air was crisp and the sunlight streamed in golden rays. Tommen beamed at her, clearly pleased with his suggestion, and they began their stroll, the quiet of the gardens offering a brief respite from the intrigues of court life. As Margaery and Tommen stepped into the gardens, the cool air brushed gently against her skin, a welcome change from the stuffiness of her chambers. The autumn sun filtered through the golden leaves, casting dappled shadows on the cobblestone path. The gardens of the Red Keep, though meticulously maintained, still held a sense of peace and calm that felt far removed from the plotting and whispers of the court. Tommen walked beside her with an easy stride, though he kept glancing toward her belly, his boyish concern evident. He had always been gentle and kind-hearted, traits that endeared him to her, though she knew those same qualities left him vulnerable to the manipulations of others, his mother, especially. "How are you feeling?" Tommen asked, his voice soft as if he feared speaking too loudly might disturb her. Margaery smiled at him, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. "I'm feeling well, Your Grace. The babes are strong." She had long since perfected the art of saying the right thing at the right time, offering reassurance when it was needed. But with Tommen, it wasn't just a performance. She truly wanted him to be at ease, to feel confident in the future they were building together. Tommen's face brightened at her words, his eyes softening with a mixture of relief and joy. "I can't wait to meet them," he said, his voice filled with a youthful innocence. "I wonder if they'll look like you." "Perhaps," Margaery replied, a smile playing on her lips. "Though I think they might take after their father, don't you? With your golden hair and gentle nature." Tommen blushed slightly, a shade of modesty still lingering in him despite the crown on his head. "I just want them to be healthy," he said after a moment, his tone sincere. "I want them to be happy." Margary's heart warmed at his words. Tommen's simple desires, so untainted by ambition or cruelty, were a rare thing in the world they lived in. He wasn't like Joffrey, whose hunger for power and cruelty had consumed him. Tommen's love was genuine, and it made Margaery all the more determined to protect the family they were creating. They walked in silence for a while, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound. Margaery glanced over at Tommen, taking in his boyish face, still untouched by the harsher realities of kingship. Cersei had kept a tight grip on him, shielding him from many of the burdens he would one day have to bear. Yet Margaery knew that soon, Tommen would need to stand on his own, to face the political tides without his mother's constant guidance. As they reached the fountain at the heart of the garden, Tommen paused, turning to her with a question in his eyes. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked, his voice suddenly unsure, as if the thought had been weighing on him. "Tired?" Margaery repeated, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of what, Your Grace?" "Of all of it," he said, glancing around the grandeur of the Red Keep. "Of being queen. Of the court, the politics, everything." Margaery studied him for a moment, the vulnerability in his expression touching her deeply. She had never seen Tommen express such doubts before. It reminded her that, despite his title, he was still so very young, still grappling with the immense responsibility placed on him. "I won't lie, Your Grace," she said softly, her voice gentle. "It can be exhausting. The court, the expectations, it can weigh heavily on anyone. But you don't have to carry it all alone. You have people who care for you, who support you." She gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "And one day soon, you will be a father. That will bring its own kind of strength, and its own kind of joy." Tommen's face softened, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. "I hope I can be as good a father as you will be a mother." Margaery's smile brightened at his words, though she felt a pang in her chest. Tommen's desire to be a good father was sincere, but she knew how difficult it could be to shield him from the darker sides of kingship, the betrayals, the manipulation, the ruthless decisions. Still, she would do everything in her power to help him become the kind of king and father that Westeros needed. "You will be," she said with certainty. "I know it." They stood together in the quiet of the garden, the fountain's gentle trickle filling the air. Margaery glanced up at the Red Keep, its towering spires casting long shadows over them. Despite the challenges ahead, she felt a sense of resolve settle within her. She would protect her family, her children, and her king, even if it meant navigating the dangerous waters of the court with more care than ever before. For now, she would let Tommen enjoy the peace of this moment, unaware of the battles that lay ahead. Walking down the path toward them, Margaery spotted Cersei, gliding with her usual regal poise, her golden hair gleaming in the sunlight. Beside her strode Lord Tywin Lannister, tall and imposing, his expression unreadable, but his presence commanding attention as always. Margaery felt her muscles tense instinctively, bracing herself for what was to come. She had long grown accustomed to navigating the treacherous waters of court, but no encounter with Cersei was ever easy. And with Tywin at her side, the weight of the Lannister family's power felt all the more suffocating. Margaery straightened her shoulders and prepared herself, diplomatic as always, yet alert for whatever challenge the two might present. Cersei's gaze, sharp as ever, landed on Margaery first. Her green eyes flickered down to Margaery's rounded belly before rising back to meet her face, lips curling into something that might have passed for a smile if it hadn't been so tightly controlled. "Out for a walk, I see," Cersei said, her tone smooth but with an edge that Margaery knew all too well. "Tommen, you should have told me you planned to take your queen out for some air. I would have joined you." Margaery's own smile remained warm, though beneath it, she felt the familiar prickle of Cersei's subtle barbs. "It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, Your Grace," she replied, glancing fondly at Tommen. "Your son is ever concerned for my health and the health of our children." "How thoughtful of him," Cersei said, her gaze softening briefly as she looked at Tommen, though there was a glint of something, possessiveness, perhaps, lingering behind her eyes. "But he is right. A future king must take care of his queen and heirs. And it's important you stay strong for the trials to come." Margaery held her ground, sensing the layered meaning in Cersei's words. Everything Cersei said felt like a game, a message wrapped in civility. It was a reminder that even now, with Margaery carrying the next generation, Cersea's position as mother and queen regent still held power. The trials to come, Margaery wondered if she was speaking of the children or the inevitable power struggles that would arise once they were born. Before Margaery could respond, Tywine cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the exchange. Tommen, he began, his eyes flickering briefly to Margaery before focusing on the boy. Your mother and I have matters to discuss with you. Important matters of state. His tone was firm, commanding in the way only Tywine Lannister could be. Tommen looked between his mother and Margaery, his expression clouded with uncertainty. He was caught, as he so often was, between the pull of his duty to his family and his desire to remain by Margaery's side. We were just finishing our walk, he said hesitantly, glancing toward Margaery for some kind of reassurance, as if hoping she could help him navigate the tension. Cersea's gaze flicked toward Margaery, her lips curving into a thin smile that barely reached her eyes. And I'm sure the Queen will be in need of another walk later, she said smoothly, her voice carrying the practiced air of someone who was accustomed to having the final word. Come, Tommen. She began to turn, fully expecting her son to follow. But Tommen hesitated. He looked back at Margaery, his brow furrowed with determination that rarely surfaced, at least in front of his mother. Margaery is my queen, he said, his voice stronger now, a ripple of defiance threading through his words. Whatever you wish to say can be said in front of her. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Margaery blinked, her surprise carefully concealed behind a serene expression, but her heart quickened. Tommen rarely defied Cersei, and though his words were soft, they carried a quiet strength. He had grown in more ways than one. Cersei's face hardened, though her smile remained plastered in place, more a mask than an expression of warmth. Her eyes, however, betrayed her, flashing with something cold and sharp. Tommen, she said, her voice edged with that familiar tone of maternal authority she wielded so effortless, there are matters of the realm that do not concern everyone. Even queens must step aside when the crown's business is at hand. Before Tommen could respond, Tywine's voice cut through the tension, as sharp and precise as the man himself. Just as you stepped aside, daughter, he asked, his piercing gaze locking onto Cersei. It was a subtle rebuke, delivered in Tywine's signature calm yet commanding manner. The power dynamics shifted in that moment, with Tywine reminding everyone who truly held the reins. The king is right, he continued, turning his attention to Tommen. Queen Margaery should be made aware of what's happening, especially when it concerns her. Margaery remained composed, though a ripple of unease stirred in her chest. She could sense something significant was about to be revealed, something far beyond mere court politics. Tywine straightened, his expression grave as he delivered the news. Stannis Baratheon has not taken kindly to the latest developments, Your Grace. For years, since his defeat at the Blackwater, he has been quietly moving across the kingdom, seeking allies, though none have given him their support. Until now, Cersei added, her voice taut with restrained anger. We've received word that he's struck a pact with the Iron Bank of Braavos. They've agreed to fund his efforts, providing him with the coin he needs to buy an army. The weight of Cersei's words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Margaery's mind immediately raced to the implications. The Iron Bank, with its near-limitless wealth, was a formidable ally for anyone seeking power. If Stannis now had the financial means to raise an army, he could become a threat once again. Tywine folded his hands behind his back, his gaze narrowing as he shared more. Our sources tell us he intends to march north. Perhaps he thinks Robb Stark could be persuaded to join his cause. Margaery, despite the unease rising within her, felt a flare of certainty. Robb would never betray us, she said firmly. He was proud, honorable, too honorable, perhaps, and she doubted he would ever turn against the crown, against her. Tywine's sharp eyes shifted to Margaery, his expression as unreadable as ever, though there was a trace of calculated caution in his tone. That may be, he said slowly, weighing her words carefully, but Stannis is still a risk. One that cannot be underestimated. Your uncle Tyrion is in the north for Arya Stark's wedding. I'll write to him, see if he can gauge Lord Stark's true feelings. But perhaps we can ensure the Stark's loyalty through other means. A more permanent bond. Margaery sensed where this was headed before Tywine even spoke his next words. Her stomach clenched, but her face remained poised, her hands lightly resting on her swollen belly as she listened. A marriage pact, Tywine continued, his voice deliberate. Between your eldest daughter and the Stark boy, Torrhen. Offering the Starks a princess could secure their allegiance for generations. Tommen blinked, his youthful features clouded with confusion. A princess, he echoed, as if the idea had never occurred to him before. We don't even know if one of the twins is a girl yet, Tommen added, his voice uncertain, glancing at Margaery as if for reassurance. The very thought of arranging a marriage for a child who might not even exist yet clearly unsettled him. Tywine, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. No, but the Queen will have more children, he replied, his voice firm, as though the matter were already settled in his mind. We simply offer the firstborn daughter of the Queen to be the future Lady of Winterfell, whenever she is born. Margaery remained silent, her mind turning over the implications of what Tywine was proposing. To bind her unborn daughter to the Starks was a strategic move, certainly, but the weight of it settled uncomfortably in her chest. The political game never ended, not even for her children. Before she could respond, Cersei spoke, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. To give the Starks that much power is a mistake, she said coldly, her eyes narrowing at Tywine as though challenging his authority. We'd be handing them influence in both the North and the South. They've always been dangerous, and they could turn on us the moment they saw an opportunity. Tywine's patience snapped, his tone suddenly harsh. It's that or see Stannis Baratheon on the throne, he retorted, his voice low but full of iron. We need the Starks on our side. Stannis is rallying his forces, and with the Iron Bank backing him, we cannot afford to make enemies of the North. Offering them a princess in marriage is a small price to pay for their loyalty. And besides, he added, with a sharp glance at Cersei, you would struggle to find a better match. Torrhen Stark will one day be Warden of the North. A Stark-Baratheon alliance would secure the realm in ways Stannis could never hope to match. Cersei's lips pressed into a thin line, her distaste for the idea clear in her expression, but she said nothing further. It was rare for her to be openly defied by her father, but Tywine was a man who saw beyond personal grudges, who weighed the fate of kingdoms above all else. Cersei had no choice but to fall silent, though the tension between her and her father was palpable. Tommen, still young and unfamiliar with the complexities of such alliances, looked to Margaery, his confusion evident. What do you think? He asked quietly, seeking her counsel. Margaery met his gaze, her heart aching at the innocence in his question. How could she explain the necessity of a political marriage to a boy who still believed in love and fairness? How could she tell him that, in their world, even their children were pawns in this game? She took a breath and spoke carefully, her voice soft but resolute. Your grandfather is right, Your Grace, she said, choosing her words with care. The North is powerful, and Torrhen Stark will one day command great respect. A marriage alliance could unite the realm, just as our marriage brought peace. But she glanced briefly at Tywine, then back to Tommen. We must be cautious. Such decisions should not be made lightly, nor in haste. Tywine gave her a curt nod of approval, recognizing her diplomatic phrasing. Indeed, he said, his voice more measured now. But the sooner we secure the Starks, the better. With the Iron Bank behind him, Stannis will grow bolder. We need to ensure the North does not waver. Margaery felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the future of her unborn daughter, her entire family, wrapped up in these quiet negotiations. She would have to tread carefully, navigating the desires of Tywine, the suspicions of Cersei, and the innocence of Tommen, all while protecting her own interests. I will do whatever is necessary to ensure the safety and unity of the realm, she said, her voice carrying the weight of the crown she wore. For our children's future. Tommen squeezed her hand gently, the trust in his eyes unwavering, though she knew he barely understood the depths of the sacrifices they would both have to make. Chapter 50, Robb 15. Chapter text. Robb 15. Robb had always feared the Godswood at night. As a boy, the whispers of old northern legends haunted him, the stories of the ancient dead, the spirits of the first men who wandered beneath the twisted branches when darkness fell. It was said that the ghosts of ancestors filled the woods at night, and even now, the memory of those fears clung to him. He could still recall the night his father, Ned, had tried to soothe him, sitting by the weirwood tree, urging him to listen to the wind as it whistled through the ancient trees. But the cold had seeped into his bones, and the shadows seemed to breathe around him. Rob had cried that night, overwhelmed by the strangeness and stillness of the Godswood. But now, Rob was no longer that frightened boy, he was a father himself, and the Lord of Winterfell. He had long conquered that fear, standing tall beneath the looming branches and the eerie stillness of the weirwood, and he was determined that his own son, Torrhen, would never inherit the same dread of the Godswood. Not when it was a place meant for family, for tradition, for the Starks. Tonight, the space was softened by the warm glow of candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows across the snow-dusted ground as they prepared for the ceremony. Beside him, Arya stood, clad in a dress she never would have chosen for herself. It was a gown of pale silver, woven with northern patterns and the Stark sigil subtly embroidered into the fabric. She tugged at it, fidgeting with the tightness where the seams clung too snugly to her figure, clearly uncomfortable in the trappings of femininity that she had spent most of her life avoiding. Her wild spirit was evident in the tension of her body, the way she shifted her weight as if ready to bolt into the woods at any moment. Rob glanced at her, seeing not just his sister, but the fierce wolf she had become, caged temporarily in silks and lace. He took her hand in his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I know this isn't what you would have chosen for yourself," Rob said quietly, his voice low and soothing, trying to ease her restless spirit. "I know it feels like a burden now, but it doesn't have to be the end of your life, Arya." He looked down at her, his blue eyes filled with the gentle understanding only a brother could offer. "It can be a new beginning, if you let it." Arya turned her head, meeting his gaze, her grey eyes hard but searching, as if looking for the truth in his words. She was always wary of what others wanted for her, always on guard, always resisting any attempt to shape her future. "Alyn Umber is a good man," Rob continued, nodding toward the large figure standing at the edge of the Godswood. Alyn stood tall, his broad shoulders wrapped in a thick fur cloak, watching the ceremony's preparations with quiet determination. Though not yet 20, Alyn was built like the mountain, strong, loyal, and fiercely protective. "He'll be a good husband. He respects you, Arya. And in time, you might even come to like him." Arya's jaw clenched, and she exhaled sharply through her nose. "I don't need a good husband, Rob. I never asked for any of this," she said, her voice edged with frustration, though it was quieter now, more resigned than defiant. Rob's hand remained steady over Arya's, anchoring her to the moment with a gentle yet firm resolve. "I know this isn't what you want, but this marriage isn't about trapping you, Arya. It's about keeping you safe, giving you a life with all the freedom you've ever dreamed of." Arya looked away, her face set in defiance, but her brother held her hand a bit tighter, pulling her attention back to him. "Alyn is a second son," he continued, his voice gentle but resolute. "As his wife, you'll never have to bear the duties of a ruling lady. You wouldn't be tied down by the expectations of a household. He's not looking for an heir from you, or a lady of Deepwood Motte. You could just be Arya, free to shape your life however you want." Arya's gaze softened slightly, the rebellious edge easing as she considered her brother's words. Rob saw the glimmer of doubt in her eyes and pressed on. "If you want to travel," he said, a small smile breaking through, "you could do it. You and Alyn could roam the world together. Think of it, seeing the Summer Isles, the free cities, maybe even venturing into the unknown lands of the East. Being his wife wouldn't keep you from that." His words painted a picture of possibility, one that he hoped could satisfy Arya's unquenchable thirst for freedom. "With Alyn, you'd have a partner who doesn't expect you to sit in a hall, tallying stores and organizing banquets. His father tells me he's never been one to care about traditional roles either, and he understands what it is to live outside of expectation. I think he would want this for you as much as I do." She was quiet, the firelight flickering in her eyes as she absorbed Rob's words, the dreams they held, the visions of a life far from the weight of duty that had marked her family's existence. "And besides, you'll be all right," Rob assured her, though in his heart he worried for his sister, the wild wolf in her that would never be fully tamed. "You've always been strong. Stronger than most." Arya looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "And what about you, Rob?" she asked, her voice softening. "Are you all right?" Rob's expression faltered for a moment, but then he nodded. "We all have our part to play, don't we?" he said, his tone steady, though Arya's question lingered in his mind longer than he'd admit. He had his own burdens to bear, the weight of the North, of Winterfell, and of his family. But tonight, it was Arya's turn to take on a role she never wanted, and as her brother, he would be there to help her through it. As the ceremony began, the candles flickering in the cold wind, Robb stood by Arya's side, holding her hand as she took her first steps into a new life. Though the Godswood was filled with shadows, the light from the Stark candles flickered defiantly against the darkness, just as Arya would in the days to come. As they walked down the aisle together, Robb couldn't help but take in the sea of faces gathered in the Godswood, each one representing the strength and unity of the North. The ceremony was more than a simple wedding, it was a gathering of nearly every northern house, a testament to their shared history and mutual allegiance. Among the attendees were representatives from far-off regions, their presence a nod to the broader alliances that were slowly forming. At the front, Robb spotted Sansa and Tyrion standing together with young Daemon. The little lordling was a striking figure, standing still and stoic like a statue, his wide eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and apprehension. Robb could see that he was a good lad, though he was quiet and reserved. Sansa's hand rested gently on Daemon's shoulder, offering a sense of calm amidst the bustle of the gathering. In stark contrast to Daemon's stillness, Robb's attention was drawn to Roslyn, who stood in the front row with an air of determined grace. She was bending down to Torrhen, their son, who squirmed and wriggled restlessly in her hold, unable to contain his youthful energy. The sight of Torrhen's antics almost made Robb chuckle, but he held back, keenly aware of the solemnity of the occasion. As they reached the altar, Robb stole a glance at Arya beside him, her expression a mix of resolve and apprehension. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, his heart swelling with a sense of hope. They were surrounded by their loved ones, by their family, each face a pillar of support in this new chapter. The moment felt heavy with promise, the flickering candlelight illuminating the faces of those who had come to witness this union, to celebrate the bonds that tied them all together. In the shadows of the Godswood, the past lingered close, but Robb felt a renewed strength, a sense of purpose. He was not only the Lord of Winterfell, he was also a father, a brother, and a son, standing together with his family to honor the ties that would shape their future. The ceremony unfolded beneath the watchful gaze of the weirwood, a blend of solemnity and warmth that was characteristic of northern weddings. Though it was a short affair, like most in the north, designed more for practicality than extravagance, it held a significance that was palpable in the crisp air. Robb stood at the altar, his heart swelling with mixed emotions as he prepared to give Arya to Alan Umber. He felt the weight of tradition pressing down upon him, the responsibility of a brother passing his sister into the care of another. Arya, in her silvery gown, looked both beautiful and fierce, embodying the spirit of the Stark family. Alan stood tall beside her, his expression earnest, a man ready to embrace the duties that came with marrying a Stark. He had witnessed Arya grow from a spirited child into a strong woman, one who would not only take on her new role but would also bring her wild spirit to Alan's life. With the ceremony drawing to a close, Robb took his place beside Roslyn, who stood at the edge of the gathering, her eyes bright with joy and pride for her husband and his sister. The warmth of the moment enveloped him as he settled into his role as a supportive brother and a loving husband. Robb then turned to Torrhen, who was practically bouncing with excitement, his little feet shifting on the ground as he watched the festivities unfold. With a soft chuckle, Robb lifted him effortless onto his hip, feeling the familiar weight of his son nestled against him. Torrhen's eyes sparkled with curiosity, his small hands gripping Robb's shoulder as he peered over the crowd. "Did you see that, father?" Torrhen exclaimed, his voice brimming with youthful enthusiasm. "Arya looked like a real princess. And Alan is so big. Can I be as big as him someday?" Robb laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You'll be bigger, my boy. Stronger, too. And when you are, you'll protect those you love just as Alan will protect Arya." Torrhen nodded solemnly, taking his father's words to heart. The bond between them felt solidified in that moment, a quiet understanding that they would always look out for one another, just as the Starks had done for generations. As the guests began to mingle, offering their congratulations to the newlyweds, Robb felt a wave of warmth flood through him. This gathering, this family, was what it meant to be a Stark. They were bound not only by blood but by the unbreakable ties of loyalty and love. Looking out over the gathering, Robb caught a glimpse of Sansa, Tyrion, and little Daemon off to the side, their expressions a mixture of pride and joy. As laughter and chatter filled the air, Robb felt a sense of hope for the future. He held Torrin a little tighter against him, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders but knowing that he was not alone in this journey. With Arya starting her new life and the promise of brighter days ahead, Rob's heart swelled with pride. They were Starks, and they would face whatever came their way, together. The next morning greeted Rob with a pounding headache, a sharp reminder of the previous night's festivities. Trying to match Tyrion drink for drink had been a mistake, one he was now paying for as the dull throb behind his eyes made him wince. He groaned softly, running a hand over his face in an attempt to shake off the remnants of sleep and the after-effects of too much wine. Beside him, Roslyn slept soundly, her face serene in the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. Rob leaned over, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek, careful not to wake her. It was a small gesture of affection, one that brought a fleeting smile to his lips despite his discomfort. As he pulled back, his eyes caught the sight of their son, Torrin, nestled in her arms, fast asleep. The boy's small form was curled against his mother, his chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of deep slumber. His hair was tousled, cheeks flushed with the warmth of the blankets, and one tiny hand clutched Roslyn's sleeve as if to anchor himself to her even in sleep. Rob's heart swelled at the sight, a moment of pure contentment washing over him despite the dull ache in his head. For a few quiet moments, he simply watched them, his wife and son, wrapped in the tranquility of the early morning. It was in these moments, the quiet ones, that Rob felt most at peace. The weight of leadership, the pressures of the past and future, seemed to fade away as he took in the scene before him. Torrin stirred slightly, his small face scrunching up before settling back into the comfort of his mother's embrace. Rob smiled, shaking his head gently. Carefully, Rob slipped out of bed, mindful not to disturb either of them. The aches and pains from the night before would fade, he knew, but the sight of his family like this, safe, content, and wrapped in love, was something he'd carry with him for much longer. With a sigh, he stretched and prepared himself to face the day, knowing that despite the challenges ahead, he had something precious to protect. Both Jon and Tyrion had requested to meet with Rob that morning, so he dressed quickly, shaking off the remnants of his headache, and made his way to the Lord's study. As he crossed the courtyard, he couldn't help but notice Arya, already awake and fully immersed in her sword practice. She was sparring with Gendry, the young steward Jon had brought with him from Castle Black. Their movements were sharp and precise, the clashing of steel echoing through the cool morning air. Both were deeply focused, until Arya, with a sudden burst of speed, caught Gendry off guard and sent him tumbling to the ground. Rob paused, a small smile tugging at his lips as he watched them laugh together. Arya extended her hand, offering to help Gendry back up, and with a mischievous grin, he took it, only to pull her down into the dirt beside him. They both fell into a fit of laughter, rolling in the dust like they were children again, their playful ease a rare and welcome sight. Seeing Arya like this, carefree, happy, and entirely herself, warmed Rob's heart. She had always been fiercely independent, more at home with a sword in her hand than playing the role of a lady. Gendry seemed to understand that. Rob wondered if that was why she looked so at ease with him, why her laughter sounded more genuine. But as much as it pleased him to see Arya smiling, a pang of regret gnawed at him. He knew her marriage to Alan Umber wasn't what she would have chosen for herself, and though Alan was a good man, Rob couldn't shake the feeling that Arya's true happiness still eluded her. Rob lingered for a moment longer, watching them as they playfully sparred again. He wished Arya could feel this same joy with her husband, that the life she had been thrust into would allow her the freedom she so clearly craved. But duty and family weighed heavily on all of them, and Rob knew that Arya would continue to honor her commitments, whether or not her heart was fully in them. With a deep breath, he turned away and continued toward the Lord's study, his mind already shifting to the business ahead. Jon and Tyrion would be waiting for him, and there were matters of the realm that could not be ignored. But even as he prepared himself for the responsibilities that lay before him, the image of Arya's laughter lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the lives they could have lived, if only the world had been kinder. Rob arrived at the Lord's study, pausing as he opened the door to see Jon, Tyrion, and Ned already seated, clearly waiting for him. "Good morning," all he greeted, slightly taken aback. "I'm sorry, I thought I was meeting Jon first this morning." Jon stood, his expression serious, though there was no trace of hostility in his brother's eyes. "I asked for them to come," Jon said, his voice calm but laced with a certain gravity. "I need to speak to all of you." Rob raised an eyebrow, curiosity stirring. Whatever Jon had to say, it was important enough to bring both their father and Tyrion into the conversation. He crossed the room and took his place at the table, ready to hear what Jon had on his mind. The air in the room felt charged with unspoken tension, and Rob had the distinct feeling that whatever this meeting was about, it would have far-reaching consequences for all of them. "There's something coming for us," Jon began, his voice low but filled with an urgency that immediately grabbed everyone's attention. "It's coming from beyond the wall, and it won't stop." Rob leaned forward, his brows furrowing as he took in Jon's words. "What do you mean, something? What exactly are we facing?" Jon met his gaze, his expression grim. "The dead," he said plainly. "An army of the dead. I've seen them, White Walkers, whites, creatures that were once men but are now something else. They are coming, and if we don't prepare, we'll be wiped out." "The White Walkers aren't real," Rob insisted, though his voice wavered slightly. "They were just stories told by old Nan to scare us into behaving. We've heard those tales all our lives." Jon's gaze sharpened, the urgency in his expression deepening. "They are real, Rob. I swear it to you. I've seen them with my own eyes. I've watched men die at their hands, and I've killed some myself." Rob shook his head, struggling to reconcile Jon's words with everything he had ever known. The legends of the White Walkers had always seemed distant and fantastical, mere myths to entertain children around the hearth. But now, confronted with Jon's fierce conviction, those comforting tales began to unravel, exposing a harsh reality that sent a shiver down his spine. "What do you mean, killed some?" Rob pressed, desperate for clarity, as though grappling with a nightmare he couldn't quite escape. "How can you kill something that's dead?" Jon inhaled deeply, steeling himself as he recalled the horror of that night at Hardham. "They can be killed, but it's not easy. They are powerful, and their magic is ancient. We lost so many before we figured out how to fight back. The only way to stop them is with dragon glass, Valyrian steel or fire." Rob glanced at Ned, seeking reassurance from his father, who sat silently, his face betraying a mixture of concern and disbelief. Yet, he could see the acceptance creeping into Ned's expression. Jon had always been the most steadfast of his siblings, and if anyone had the will to face such dangers, it was him. "Do you really expect us to believe this?" Rob asked, struggling against the gnawing fear rising within him. "That the dead are marching on the living?" "They do," Jon said, his voice fierce. "I've seen it. Men I once called brothers, risen from the dead to fight for them. We're facing something that can make the living into the dead, Rob. We're facing an enemy unlike any other. I swear to you on my word as a Night's Watchman and as your brother." Rob felt his defenses crumbling. The weight of Jon's conviction was heavy, and the more he listened, the more he felt the reality of the situation seep into his bones. "So what do we do?" he asked finally, a mix of frustration and fear spilling into his words. "How do we fight something that can raise the dead?" Jon's expression softened, a flicker of hope shining through the darkness. "We unite, Rob. We gather our forces and warn everyone. We have to convince the Lords of the North, and those in the South, that this is a threat they can't ignore. We need to forge alliances and prepare for what's coming." Ned leaned forward, his voice steady and commanding. "Jon is right. We may have been divided by our differences, but this is a fight for our very existence. If the dead march, we need to be ready. Our banners must fly together." Rob looked between his brother and father, feeling the weight of their shared resolve settling on his shoulders. "Then we will rally our bannermen," he declared, determination flaring within him. "We will send ravens to the other houses, warn them of the threat we face. We'll gather every sword we can and stand together against this." Jon nodded, relief washing over him. "It's the only way we stand a chance, and we need to reach out to the free folk as well," Jon added. "If anyone knows how to survive in the cold, it's them. We need to let them past the wall, or we may as well offer them up to the White Walkers now." Rob felt a fire igniting in his chest. They were not just reacting to a threat, they were taking the fight to the enemy. They had the opportunity to forge a new path, not just for the North but for the entire realm. "You've seen this yourself?" Ned asked quietly, his tone even but full of authority. Jon nodded. "At Hardham. I watched thousands fall, only to rise again under the command of the White Walkers. They are Raoul, father. This isn't a myth or an old tale to scare children, this is happening. You won't convince my father, Tyrion said, his tone laced with a mix of skepticism and resignation. He won't believe in Snooks and Grumpkins, let alone the threat of the dead walking among us. Then you need to convince him, Jon replied, a note of urgency threading through his words. Tyrion leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he considered the weight of the task ahead. Or I can offer an alternative, he said, his voice lowering conspiratorially. It's why I wanted to speak to you, Robb. Daenerys Targaryen is ready to come home. The moment the name left Tyrion's lips, Ned stood from his seat, his posture rigid, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and caution. Daenerys Targaryen, he echoed, the name heavy with the echoes of history, stirring memories of a time when the Targaryens were both revered and reviled. Yes, Tyrion confirmed, his voice steady despite the gravity of the topic. She is backed by an army of Unsullied and a horde of Dothraki fighters, not to mention 3 dragons. The last word hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment, the room was silent as the implications settled over them. Robb blinked, processing the information. Dragons, real, living dragons. He'd heard the stories, had marveled at the idea of their existence, but now the possibility felt both exhilarating and terrifying. And you expect us to trust her? A Targaryen, he asked, skepticism creeping into his tone. Her family has done nothing but bring ruin to our houses. She's not her father, Robb Tyrion insisted, leaning forward, his eyes earnest. Daenerys has spent her life fighting for her right to rule. She's not just a claimant to a throne, she's an experienced leader who has freed slaves and built a loyal following. She knows what it means to be oppressed, to fight for the living. Ned remained silent, his brow furrowed as he absorbed the gravity of Tyrion's words. After a moment, he spoke, his voice steady but cautious. You say she is ready to come home, but to what end? Does she wish to reclaim the Iron Throne? And how can we be certain she would not turn on us once she has it? Tyrion sighed, sensing the doubts swirling in the room. I cannot speak for her intentions, only for what I've seen. Daenerys desires to end the cycle of violence and oppression. She is a different kind of ruler, one who values the lives of her people. But can we trust her? Robb asked, his voice firm yet uncertain. After all that's happened, after the chaos her family caused. The North has long memories. If the dead are coming, Tyrion said, his expression serious, we need something bigger than ourselves to fight them. He turned his gaze to Jon, a spark of determination igniting in his eyes. You say fire can kill them. Then we need her dragons. Tyrion leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if he were crafting a strategy. They can provide the advantage we desperately need. Fire can destroy the Whites and the White Walkers. If Daenerys Targaryen is willing to lend us her dragons, it could turn the tide in our favor. Robb felt a flicker of hope at the mention of dragons. Let me get this straight, he said, raising an eyebrow. You want us to convince Daenerys to join our cause, to bring her dragons here to fight the dead, and in return, we help her reclaim the Iron Throne. Yes, Tyrion replied, his voice steady. Let me write to her. Let her prove herself against the dead, and then we can help her in her claim. If she can demonstrate that her dragons can truly vanquish the threat we face, then we can rally the North and beyond to her cause. It's a gamble, but one that might pay off. Ned, still processing the idea, crossed his arms, deep in thought. And if she refuses? If she sees the dragons as her means to power and nothing more? Tyrion shrugged, unperturbed by the question. Then we'll know she's not the ally we hoped for. But she is coming to Westeros regardless. It's better to engage with her now than to wait for her to land with an army and dragons, expecting fealty without understanding the stakes. Jon looked at Robb, gauging his reaction. This isn't just about the North. It's about the future of all of us. The longer we wait, the more we risk losing everything. Daenerys could be the key to fighting back the darkness. And how do we approach her? Ned asked, breaking into their thoughts. What if she sees us as a threat rather than an ally? Tyrion smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. I'll ensure she knows that we come with open hands, not weapons drawn. I can write to her personally, explain the situation, and offer our assistance. Daenerys is not like her ancestors. She seeks to do right by her people, and if we can convince her that our enemies are the same, she may just listen. Jon nodded, the plan starting to take shape. If we're going to do this, we need to present a united front. We should emphasize the importance of this alliance and how it could benefit both parties. We need to convince her that helping us fight the dead is not only noble but necessary. Robb felt a surge of resolve as the plan solidified. Then let's move quickly. I'll gather the necessary information about our situation, and you can draft a letter to Daenerys. Time is of the essence. Tyrion's expression shifted to one of urgency. I'll get to work on the letter immediately. We must be clear about the stakes involved. This isn't just about thrones, it's about survival. Ned nodded, a deep sense of purpose emerging in the room. We'll prepare for her response while also readying our forces. We need to be vigilant and ready for whatever comes next. As they began to formulate their plans, a sense of determination filled the air. They were no longer just reacting to threats, they were taking proactive steps to secure their future against the encroaching darkness. The idea of dragons and the potential for an alliance with Daenerys Targaryen seemed like a distant dream, but with every passing moment, it felt more and more attainable. Robb took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. They had a battle ahead, not just against the dead, but against the complexities of politics and trust. But he knew they were united in purpose, and that gave him hope. Together, they would fight for the living, and for the future of Westeros. Chapter 51, Jon I. Chapter text. Jon I. Telling his family about the threat looming in the north felt like lifting a heavy burden from Jon's shoulders. For far too long, he had carried the weight of this knowledge alone, the fear and uncertainty gnawing at him like a relentless winter chill. He recalled the first time he had encountered a White nearly 6 years ago. At that moment, he had been just a boy at the wall, unprepared for the dark realities that lurked beyond it. Back then, when the bodies of the dead men had come shambling back to life, Jon had thought they must not have been truly dead, perhaps merely unconscious or gravely ill. He imagined them overtaken by a parasite or some terrible disease, their souls trapped in an endless nightmare. But after he plunged his sword into that first White, stabbing it over and over, he realized how wrong he was. It took fire to finally put the creature down, to banish it back into the grave from whence it had come. That was the moment Jeor Mormont had entrusted him with Longclaw, a Valyrian steel sword that had been passed down through generations of the Mormont family. In that instant, Jon felt a deep sense of belonging, a connection to the Night's Watch that he had never fully grasped before. For 3 years, he had served as Mormont's squire, learning the ways of the Watch, the importance of loyalty, and the burden of duty. During that time, there had been no further whispers of men rising from the dead. The greatest threats they faced were the wildlings. Though they posed their own challenges, they were easy enough to contain, and the Watch had focused on maintaining the fragile peace along the wall. But as seasons turned and the chill of winter deepened, Jon began to notice a shift. Rangers started to go missing again, men who ventured north and never returned. The reports from the other members of the Watch grew increasingly troubling. It was then that Jeor had made the decision to lead an expedition north to discover what had happened to their fallen brothers. As they journeyed further into the icy expanse, the familiar signs of wildling encampments became increasingly scarce. The forests, once teeming with life, felt unnaturally silent, devoid of movement or sound. It was eerie, and unease settled in the pit of Jon's stomach as they pressed on. When they eventually reached Craster's Keep, it stood as a lone bastion in the midst of the desolation, a place that had long been a source of discomfort and suspicion among the men of the Watch. That was where Jon and Samwell Tarly had first encountered Gilly, a girl whose beauty was overshadowed by the profound sadness etched into her features. Sam, with his awkward charm and earnestness, had been immediately taken with her, though it was clear that Gilly was a soul weighed down by grief. Craster, with a callousness that made Jon's skin crawl, had revealed the tragedy that had befallen her, 3 sons lost in as many years. Each death had stripped away her spirit, leaving her a mere shadow of the girl she might once have been. As they pressed on from Craster's Keep, Jon was drawn into the dangers that lay further north. He had joined forces with the infamous Corinne Halfhand, a seasoned ranger known for his hard-nosed tactics and deep understanding of the wildling way of life. It was during this time that John ventured deeper into the treacherous mountains, where the air was thin and the snow seemed to bury everything in an eternal silence. It was there, amidst the howling winds and stark landscapes, that he met Ygritte. A wilding girl with fiery red hair and fierce spirit, she captivated him in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. John had fallen hard for her, her laughter echoing in his mind long after their encounters. But to win her trust, he had made choices that haunted him. He had killed Corinne Halfhand, a man he respected, to prove his loyalty to the wildlings. It was a brutal act of betrayal that forced him to turn his back on the Night's Watch, his brothers, and everything he had sworn to protect. Ygritte had taken him to meet Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, and for the first time, John felt a sense of belonging among the wildlings. They had welcomed him, treated him as one of their own, and for a brief moment, John experienced a freedom he had never known. Yet, that freedom came at a price. As he learned more about their plans to attack the wall, an inescapable conflict arose within him. He understood the danger they posed not just to the Night's Watch but to the North as a whole. He was torn between the life he had known and the love he had found, ultimately leading him to make the hardest decision of all. He left Ygritte and her people, returning to warn the Night's Watch of the impending threat. They had attacked anyway, despite his desperate attempts to broker peace. Men from both sides, those who had come to trust him, wildling and crow alike, fell around him, and he was forced to watch, powerless, as they killed each other. The horror of it blurred before his eyes, and then she was there, Ygritte, bleeding in his arms. Her last breath had carried bitterness, her fierce gaze filled with hurt and hatred. Every day since, her memory haunted John, wrapping itself around him like a shadow he could neither shake nor forget. In quiet moments, he relived the time they had shared, as if clutching fragments of a dream now forever lost. He remembered the warmth of her touch, how her laughter could thaw the frozen emptiness of the land beyond the wall, how her fierce, unbreakable spirit had softened his own fears. With her, he had felt alive even in the bleakest places, her fire had become his sanctuary. But always, those memories carried a dark edge, tainted by the choices he had made and the lives they had destroyed. John had fought his own brothers, seen Jeor Mormont cut down in front of him, and fought tooth and nail to win back the trust of the Night's Watch. That trust had come with a price. He had been named Lord Commander, a title that felt heavy on his shoulders. He had witnessed the true horror of the world at Hardham, where the dead rose, unrelenting and merciless. The nightmares from that day never truly left him, a constant reminder that the battle for survival was far from over. Now, he had made his way back to Winterfell for the first time in 2 years. John knew he was not the same boy who had left. He had been hardened by war, by loss, by the cold realities of the world beyond the wall. But he had returned with a purpose. He was ready to fight again, this time, not just for the Night's Watch, but for the living. The plan was in motion, though the path ahead felt as uncertain as ever. Tyrion would send a raven to Daenerys Targaryen, seeking her terms and laying the foundation for what could be a dangerous alliance. There was no telling what her demands might be, but Tyrion trusted that the Dragon Queen, as fierce as she was, could be reasoned with. Meanwhile, John would return to the wall. The threat from beyond the wall still loomed large, and every able-bodied man would be needed to defend against it. Robb had pledged 1,000 men from the north to support the Night's Watch. It was a gesture of brotherly loyalty, but John knew all too well that it wouldn't be enough. Not against the Night King, not against the army of the dead. Still, he would take what he could. It was a start, and perhaps, if they survived long enough, more would follow. That evening, John had retreated to his old chambers in Winterfell, the familiar scent of wood and stone stirring a mix of memories. It felt strange to be back here, in the very room where he had once slept as a boy, full of dreams and uncertainties. So much had changed. He had changed. Now, his thoughts were consumed by duty and the war to come. Tomorrow, he would set out for the wall once more, to stand where his brothers had stood, to defend the realm against an enemy few could even comprehend. He sat by the small fire that flickered in the hearth, staring into the flames, his mind drifting to Ygritte, to the wildlings he had lost, to the faces of the men who had died under his command. The weight of leadership, of decisions made, pressed heavily on him. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find solace in the quiet, when a knock at the door broke through his thoughts. His eyes snapped open, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. Few people would come to him at this hour. He rose from his seat, the floor creaking slightly beneath his feet as he made his way to the door. He opened it slowly, uncertain of who or what he might find on the other side. "John," came the familiar voice, deep and steady, as the door creaked open wider. Ned Stark stood before him, the light from the hallway casting long shadows on his face. John blinked, momentarily taken aback. Though much had changed in the years since John had last seen his father, there was something timeless in the way Ned held himself, his quiet strength, the steadfastness in his gaze. Time had weathered him, his hair, once dark, was streaked with silver, and lines creased the corners of his eyes and mouth. Yet, despite all that had transpired, the soul that lived within Ned Stark was unchanged. He was still the same man who had raised John, who had taught him the values of honor and duty, the man John had always admired. "Father," John said quietly, stepping back to allow him into the room. Ned stepped into the room with his usual calm, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings as if seeing them for the first time in years. The old chamber, once again John's for the night, was just as Ned remembered it, a place that had once been John's refuge as a boy. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the stone walls, and the scent of burning wood filled the air, mingling with the cold of the northern night. Ned's face softened as he turned his gaze back to John, and for a moment, a flicker of something passed between them, understanding, maybe even affection. "It's good to see you," Ned said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years. "It's been too long." John nodded, feeling the truth of those words in his bones. Too long indeed. Too many battles, too much blood, and too many losses had passed since they had last stood together in Winterfell. There was an unspoken recognition between them, both changed by the events of the last few years. John was no longer the uncertain boy who had left Winterfell to join the Night's Watch. "You've done well, John," Ned said after a moment, his voice low, but filled with pride. "The war, the men you've led, you've become the man I always knew you could be." John looked away, the weight of those words heavy on his shoulders. He didn't feel like the man his father believed him to be. He carried too many ghosts, Grit, his brothers of the Night's Watch, the people he had failed. "I've made too many mistakes," John murmured, staring at the fire. "I'm not sure I've done anything right." Ned shook his head slowly. "Mistakes are a part of life, John. No man lives without them. It's how we carry them that defines us." The words hit John deeply, reminding him of the wisdom Ned had imparted during his youth, lessons about honor and integrity, even in the face of impossible choices. Ned Stark had lived his life by those values, even when it had cost him dearly. Silence hung between them for a moment, the crackling of the fire filling the room. John finally looked up, meeting his father's eyes. "The war's coming. I don't know if we can win." Ned's face remained calm, though there was a gravity in his expression. "The dead don't give us a choice, John. We must fight, whether we win or not." John nodded. He had known that truth for a long time now, but hearing it from Ned made it feel more real, more urgent. They stood on the precipice of something much greater than themselves, and the fight ahead would determine the fate of everyone they loved. "You're not alone in this," Ned said, stepping closer and resting a hand on John's shoulder. "You have your family. You have the North. And you have me." "Thank you," John whispered, his voice barely audible. Ned nodded once more, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Get some rest, John. Tomorrow's another day, and there's much to be done." As Ned turned to leave, John noticed the briefest hesitation in his father's step. It was subtle, a slight pause, a shift in his stance, but John could tell something weighed on him. Ned had come with more than just words of comfort, there was something unspoken, a burden he had carried for years. John's gaze followed him closely, sensing the quiet turmoil beneath his father's calm exterior. For a moment, it seemed as if Ned might leave without addressing it, but then, with a deep breath, he turned back, his expression unreadable but resolute. The firelight flickered across his weathered face, casting shadows in the lines etched by time and hardship. "Actually," Ned began, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant, "will you walk with me?" John blinked, caught off guard. His father wasn't one for spontaneous requests, not without a reason. There was something deeper here, something important. John nodded, rising from his seat without a word. He could see it in Ned's eyes, the weight of an old promise. Ned stepped closer, the tension between them palpable, though not in a way that felt threatening. It was the weight of expectation, of secrets long buried. "There's something I promised to do a long time ago," Ned said, his tone solemn, almost regretful. John's heart quickened. He had seen this side of his father only once before, the day they had said goodbye before John left for the war. It was the same restrained pain, the same burden that had never been spoken aloud. John had sensed it then 6 years ago, but now it felt even heavier, more pressing, as if years of silence were about to be broken. Wordlessly, John grabbed his cloak from the chair and swung it over his shoulders, stepping into the corridor beside his father. They walked in silence through the winding halls of Winterfell, the familiar cold stone underfoot, torches flickering as they passed. The castle felt timeless, as though the very walls held memories older than any of them, and yet there was something new in the air tonight. Ned led the way with a slow, purposeful stride, and John couldn't help but wonder where they were going. The night outside was frigid, the winds of winter sweeping across the castle grounds, but it wasn't the cold that made John uneasy. It was the sense that they were heading towards something momentous, something that had lingered in the shadows for far too long. Finally, after what felt like an age, they descended into the crypts beneath Winterfell, the air growing colder with each step they took. The flickering torchlight cast long, eerie shadows on the stone walls, illuminating the ancient faces of the Stark statues that lined the passage. Each figure stood solemnly, sword in hand, guarding the tombs of long-dead kings and lords, their eyes hollow and watching, as if they knew the secrets the living carried. John felt the weight of the place pressing down on him, the chill not just from the cold stone but from the history these crypts held, the history of his family. His footsteps echoed through the narrow corridor as they went deeper, the silence between him and Ned thick with unspoken words. The crypts had always held a solemn place in John's heart, a sanctuary of shadows and stone, meant for the dead and those who mourned them. As a child, he had often wandered these narrow halls, tracing his fingers over the faces carved into the ancient statues, each one a Stark with a story woven into Winterfell's very foundations. He'd let his imagination fill in the lives behind those faces, creating tales of valor and sacrifice, silently wondering where he might fit into the tapestry of their legacy. Sometimes, Robb would join him, his laughter echoing through the cold, dim chambers. Robb, the true heir to Winterfell, would one day stand immortalized in these crypts, a lord whose legacy would be honored and remembered. John, meanwhile, would never have a place here. He was the bastard of Winterfell, an outsider even in his home, destined to fade from memory like a breath in winter air. The crypts reminded him of that unspoken truth. He felt he was merely passing through the stories of others, bound to be forgotten, his place within this family's history uncertain, as transient as the flicker of the torches that lined the stone walls. Ned led the way, his torch lighting the faces of the Stone Kings and Queens, the ancient lords of Winterfell, and John followed in silence, his mind reeling. At last, they reached the deepest part of the crypts, where the most recent members of House Stark lay in rest. The air was colder here, more still. John's eyes moved over the familiar tombs. Brandon Stark, Rickard Stark, the father and brother Ned had lost in Robert's rebellion. And there, at the end, the newest addition to the crypt, Lyanna Stark. Her tomb was simple, unadorned but for the Stark sigil and her name carved in the stone. The stone likeness of her face gazed out into the dark, her features delicate yet strong. John found himself frozen in place, his breath catching in his throat. Ned came to a stop in front of her tomb and stood there in silence for a moment, his head bowed as if offering a prayer. John, uncertain of what to do or say, stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "She was the best of us," Ned murmured, his voice thick with years of unshed grief. "Out of the four of us, Brandon, me, Lyanna, and Benjen, and now, I'm the only one left." John looked at his father, catching the flicker of pain that softened his stern features. The grief was there, raw as ever, despite all the years that had passed. Ned's shoulders, though still strong, seemed to bear the invisible weight of a lifetime of loss. "I failed her," Ned continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Long before she died. We all did, in our own way, from the moment she was born. Lyanna was meant for something greater, something we never understood. We saw her as our fiery, impulsive sister, but she deserved more than us, and the world failed her every day until it stole her away from us." John felt a pang in his chest as he watched the sorrow wash over Ned's face. He rarely spoke of Lyanna, of the grief that lingered like a shadow in the corners of his soul. Yet tonight, here in the crypts beneath Winterfell, the walls Ned had built around that sorrow seemed to crumble. "What happened, wasn't your fault," John said gently. It felt strange, trying to console his father, the man he had always seen as unwavering, as unbreakable. Ned gave a sad smile, the kind that barely lifted his lips. "Sometimes I think of her, John, the way I remember her, wild and fierce, like she could run with wolves if she wanted to. She lived by her own rules. And when I think of what she might have had, a life of freedom, love, it's a bitter thing to accept." They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet broken only by the crackle of the torchlight, shadows casting faint patterns along the stone walls. Ned sighed deeply, the sound filled with the weight of years of unspoken truths. "John," he began, his voice low but steady. "I've carried something with me for most of your life, something I should have told you long ago." John's stomach tightened, but he remained silent, letting his father speak. "When you left for the wall," Ned began, his voice tight with uncharacteristic vulnerability, "I told you that the next time we met, I'd tell you about your mother." His gaze faltered, a flicker of emotion breaking through the stoic mask he had always worn. "But the truth, John, it's not what you think." John's heart thundered in his chest, his breath catching as the words sank in. The mystery of his mother had haunted him his entire life. He'd spent countless nights wondering, his mind crafting faces and voices for the woman who had been just a shadow, hidden away from him. Every time he dared to ask, Ned's answers had been evasive, leaving John more frustrated and questioning than before. But now, here they were, in the dim glow of the crypts, his father standing before him, finally willing to pull back the veil of secrecy. After everything, was he finally going to get an answer? Ned's gaze dropped as he gathered his thoughts, and John could see a trace of the immense weight he'd been carrying for years. At last, Ned looked up, meeting John's eyes with a steady resolve. "She was your mother, John." "Lyanna," he said, his voice a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "She loved fiercely, as only she could. And Rhaegar, he didn't take her. She went to him willingly. They loved each other and their love made you." John staggered, his mind trying to reconcile the words with everything he'd ever been told, with the legends and whispers that painted Rhaegar as a dark prince and Lyanna as his captive. It felt impossible. Ned took a step closer, his gaze never leaving John's. "I didn't know until after the war. After Rhaegar had already fallen. She was hidden in a small castle in Dorne called the Tower of Joy, a place so remote no one could find her." Ned's voice grew softer, laced with guilt. "A woman named Asha Ardain told me where to look. I rode there as fast as I could, desperate to bring her back, to save her, but, by the time I reached her, it was too late. She was in labor, trying to bring you into the world." John felt his throat tighten, the image of his mother, his true mother, Lyanna Stark, alone and suffering, surrounded by the emptiness of a foreign land, was too much to bear. "She lost too much blood," Ned continued, his voice breaking, "and in the end, I couldn't save her. But before she slipped away, she gave me you. She made me promise, a promise I could never break." John's fists clenched as the weight of Ned's words settled over him. He had lived his life thinking of himself as a Stark bastard, loved but distant from the honor of his name. Yet here he was, not just a Stark, but a son of Lyanna, of the Targaryen line. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" John asked, voice shaking. The anger, confusion, and sorrow all flooded him at once. "Why keep this from me? Let me live as a bastard, let me join the Night's Watch without even knowing." Ned swallowed hard, the weight of his words evident in his eyes. "If anyone had known the truth," he said, voice breaking slightly, "you would never have been safe. You would have been seen as a threat, hunted as the last of Rhaegar's line. And your mother, her last wish was that you would live, John. To protect you, I thought it best to let you grow without the chains of this secret, free of the burdens that would come with it." He hesitated, gathering himself before continuing. "Your mother named you Jaehaerys, after one of the greatest kings House Targaryen has ever known." Then, gently, he placed a hand on John's shoulder, a father's hand, steady and warm, yet full of sorrow for the secret he'd kept. "But you're more than that. You're a Stark, in every way that matters. Blood doesn't change the man you've become, Jon. It doesn't change your loyalty, your honor. That is yours alone. The torchlight flickered, casting their faces in long shadows across the stone walls, echoing with the weight of generations. Silence stretched between them as Jon tried to make sense of this new truth. But by blood, Ned added, breaking the quiet, his voice grave, you are the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Jon felt as though the world shifted beneath him. The words hung in the air, so heavy he could barely breathe under their weight. Jaehaerys. He had always known he was different, an outsider even in his own family. But this. It was too much. He had spent his whole life believing he was a bastard. Now, in a moment, that identity had been torn away, replaced with something far more dangerous and far more foreign. Why are you telling me this now? Jon asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Ned exhaled slowly, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword as if it were the only thing anchoring him. Because the world is changing, Jon. We are about to declare for Daenerys Targaryen. We are about to support her claim to the Iron Throne. But. He hesitated, as though weighing each word carefully. We don't have to. If you want it, if you're willing, we could support you. You, Jaehaerys Targaryen. Jon's heart skipped a beat. The name, so foreign to his ears, felt as though it belonged to someone else. He could almost see it, the life he could claim, the throne he could sit upon, the legacy of fire and blood that was his by birthright. He could see armies bending the knee, the great houses of Westeros swearing fealty to him, the rightful king. But it wasn't him. It had never been him. No, Jon said quietly, shaking his head as the weight of his answer settled in his chest. That's not who I am. His voice was firmer now, resolute. I am a brother of the Night's Watch. I made an oath. I shall wear no crowns, hold no lands. I may have been born Jaehaerys, he struggled with the name, the way it tasted foreign and bitter in his mouth, but now I am Jon Snow. I will live and die at my post, protecting the realm from what's out there. Ned studied him for a long moment, his face unreadable, but his eyes spoke volumes, pride, sorrow, and a father's endless love. Jon, the world isn't as simple as vows anymore. You've seen it. You've seen the dead rise at Hardham, you've felt the cold that's coming. You know what's beyond the wall. Your place in this world is not so small. The time will come when you must make a choice, not as a brother of the Night's Watch, but as who you were born to be. Jon's jaw clenched, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He had spent his whole life trying to make peace with who he was. A bastard. The boy who didn't belong. And now, just when he had found his purpose at the wall, when he had earned the respect of his brothers, Ned was offering him a crown. But that wasn't what he wanted. Who I was born to be. Jon's voice hardened. I wasn't born to be king, I was born to be hidden. You hid me, my mother hid me. I've spent my whole life being something I'm not. I don't want to be Jaehaerys Targaryen. I don't care about the Iron Throne. Let Daenerys have it, let her be the queen she was born to be. I don't want it. Ned's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Jon saw the man who had raised him, the man who had loved him like a son even when the world insisted he was something less. I know, Jon, Ned said gently. But the choice will come to you all the same, whether you seek it or not. The truth cannot be buried forever. Jon turned away, his mind spinning. He thought of the wall, the brothers he had sworn to protect. He thought of Ygritte, and the love he had lost in the wild, the promises he had made. He thought of the dead, and the war that was coming, a war far more important than crowns and thrones. That was where his duty lay. Not in the south, not in the halls of kings and queens, but in the cold north where the real battle awaited. I belong at the wall, Jon said finally, his voice firm but tinged with sadness. That's where I can do the most good. That's where I'm needed. I'm not a king, Jon said quietly. And I never will be. Ned nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll respect your choice, Jon. Whatever it may be. But know this, the blood of kings runs through your veins. And no matter what name you choose to go by, that will never change. Jon looked once more at his father, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what could have been. I'm Jon Snow, he said, more to himself than to Ned. I'll always be Jon Snow. And with that, the weight of his true name, Jaehaerys Targaryen, drifted into the cold air of the crypts, like a shadow of a life that was never meant to be. Chapter 52, Daenerys I. Chapter text. Daenerys I. Daenerys woke with the first light of dawn, as she had every morning since her arrival in Meereen. The pale, golden sunlight filtered through the ornate windows, casting long shadows across the room. The warmth of the sun contrasted sharply with the cold she had felt within her for so long. Daario lay beside her, his presence familiar yet distant. He slept soundly, sprawled across the bed, but her thoughts had long drifted away from him. She glanced at him briefly but did not linger, her mind already far from the comfort he offered. With quiet determination, Daenerys rose from the bed and began to dress. She no longer needed help, she preferred the solitude of these moments, the stillness before the world demanded everything of her. As she pulled on her gown, a garment of deep violet trimmed with gold, she caught her reflection in the polished mirror. The woman who stared back was not the girl she had once been. That girl, frightened, naive, had been left behind long ago, burned to ashes on the pyre with Drogo, where her innocence had died with him. Her silver hair, once wild and untamed, now fell in intricate braids, a symbol of her growth and the strength she had claimed. Her violet eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now reflected the hard-won wisdom of years spent in battle and conquest. The Mother of Dragons. Breaker of Chains. The titles meant everything, and nothing. The weight of them was a constant presence on her shoulders, but she wore them proudly. She had earned them with blood and fire. 6 years had passed since that fateful night on the Dothraki Sea when she had walked into the flames, and she had never looked back. The fire had forged her, and Meereen had become her crucible. She had ruled the city for nearly 5 years now, and though it had become her home, it still amazed her in its grandeur. The towering pyramids, the sprawling markets, the people, free now because of her, who filled the streets with hope and life. She had done that. She had brought freedom to the Slavers Bay, now named the Bay of Dragons, and yet, there were still days when it felt like the battle was never truly over. As she walked through the halls of her palace, her footsteps echoing against the cool marble floors, she marveled at the beauty of Meereen. It was a city born of contradictions, wealth and poverty, grandeur and ruin, a place where her vision of the world clashed with the stubborn remnants of the past. Every morning as she walked these halls, she was reminded of the journey that had brought her here. From the girl sold as a bride to the queen who had crossed Essos not with a great army but with 3 dragons and a dream. She had freed the Unsullied in Astapa, raised the slave markets of Yunkai, and taken Meereen by force, but she had stayed for something more than conquest. She had stayed to rule, to build something lasting. And though it had been difficult, far more difficult than she had ever imagined, she had succeeded. But the dream of Meereen was not enough. She knew that now. As much as she loved this city, as much as she had given her heart to its people, her destiny lay elsewhere. Across the narrow sea, the Iron Throne awaited, and with it, the promise of her birthright. Westeros. The name still stirred something deep within her, a longing she had tried to suppress but could no longer deny. She paused in the grand hall, gazing out at the rising sun as it bathed the city in a soft, golden light. The winds from the east were warm, carrying the scent of the sea, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe in the peacefulness of it all. But peace was fleeting. She knew that better than most. Daario had once told her she was too restless for peace, that she was born to conquer, not to rule. Perhaps he was right, but it wasn't just a lust for conquest that drove her. It was justice, it was the need to create a better world than the one she had inherited. A world free of tyrants, of chains, of the oppression that had marked her entire life. That was what had kept her here in Meereen for so long, the desire to build a new kind of rule, a rule where she was not feared but loved. But even as she tried to build, the pull of the Iron Throne grew stronger. The letters from Tyrion had been a constant reminder of the war that was yet to come. She had been patient, far more patient than anyone had expected, but her dragons grew restless, and so did she. The time for caution was ending. Soon, she would have to act. Daenerys touched the silver chain around her neck, a gift from Missandei, who had remained her most trusted confidant. The world will know the strength of the dragon once more, Missandei had said when she had fastened it around Daenerys' throat. The words echoed in Daenerys' mind now as she thought of the world beyond Meereen. Soon, very soon, the world would indeed feel the fire of the dragon again. And this time, she would not stop until the Iron Throne was hers. But for now, she would wait, just a little longer. Because the greatest victories were not born of impulse, but of careful, deliberate action. Daenerys swept into her council chamber, the train of her gown trailing behind her as her presence filled the room. Barristan Selmy and Varys were already deep in conversation, their hushed voices cutting off the moment they noticed her arrival. The tension in the air was palpable, but Daenerys wore a calm, almost playful expression as she approached the table. "Not starting without me, I hope," she said, her voice light, though her eyes held a sharp edge. She moved gracefully to her seat at the head of the table, the seat reserved for the Queen of Meereen. Varys, ever the picture of deference, bowed his head slightly. "Of course not, Your Grace," he replied smoothly, his hands folded neatly in front of him. There was always an air of mystery to the spider, but Daenerys had grown accustomed to it. She had learned to trust him, up to a point. Barristan Selmy, her most loyal and trusted knight, offered her a small nod of respect. His weathered face was calm, but Daenerys could sense the weight of the news he carried. "We were just discussing the latest developments from Westeros, Your Grace," he said, his deep voice steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Daenerys raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. Westeros. The word itself was a trigger, sending a pulse of energy through her. "What news?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, her hands resting on the cool marble of the table. Varys exchanged a brief glance with Barristan before he spoke. "King Tommen has announced the Queen is expecting twins. They are solidifying their hold on the throne, Your Grace. The Lannisters have always been skilled at securing their legacy." His tone was careful, measured, but Daenerys could hear the underlying tension. The Lannisters were a formidable enemy, and they were fortifying their position. Daenerys sat back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly against the armrest as she processed the news. "Tommen was never a real threat, it's Tywin we need to worry about," she mused, her voice low. Her gaze shifted to Barristan, the knight who had once served her father, who had seen the fall of House Targaryen firsthand. He had warned her many times of the ruthlessness of the Lannisters, of the blood that stained their rise to power. "They will not give up the throne easily," Barristan said, his voice heavy with the weight of years spent watching the Game of Thrones unfold. He stood tall, his weathered face lined with concern, though his eyes still held the fierce loyalty of a man sworn to protect his queen. "Those twins are not just heirs, Your Grace. To Tywin Lannister, they are nothing more than opportunity. They are the key to solidifying his power, to ensuring that his legacy endures long after he's gone." Daenerys' gaze darkened, her hands resting on the cool surface of the council table as she leaned forward, listening intently. Barristan's words carried the sharp edge of truth. She knew Tywin's reputation well, ruthless, calculating, a man who always played the long game. The birth of these twins was not just a family matter, it was a political move, a strategic reinforcement of the Lannisters' claim to the Iron Throne. "He's not just thinking about his children, or even his grandchildren," Barristan continued, his voice grave. "To Tywin, this is about more than bloodlines. This is about control. Those twins will cement his hold on the throne, make sure that everything keeps ticking over exactly the way he wants after he's gone. He's built an empire, and he will not just walk away from that." Daenerys stood up, pacing the length of the chamber, her thoughts racing. She had always known the Lannisters were not an enemy to be taken lightly. They had ruled Westeros with an iron grip for too long, shaping the realm's fate to suit their ambitions. But hearing it laid out so plainly, this was no ordinary birth. It was a move in Tywin's endless quest for dominance. Varys, standing by the fire, nodded slightly. "Tywin Lannister thinks in terms of dynasties, Your Grace. He doesn't care about the throne for the sake of power itself, he cares about power for what it can build. For him, the Iron Throne is a tool, a means to create a world that revolves around the Lannisters. It's why he pushed so hard for Cersei to marry Robert Baratheon and why he now clings to Tommen's reign. The twins will only deepen his influence. But no dynasty lasts forever," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "The Targaryens once ruled with fire and blood, and we were brought low. The Lannisters will fall the same way. Tywin may think he can control the future through his children and grandchildren, but the future belongs to those who will rise, not those who cling to the past. Barristan watched her, pride gleaming faintly in his eyes. That is the truth, Your Grace. No matter how carefully Tywin plans, no matter how strong he believes his house to be, there are forces beyond his control. You are one of those forces. Daenerys stopped pacing and faced her advisors, her face set with determination. Tywin Lannister may think he can shape the realm to his will, but he has not faced me yet. I am not just another name to be written in his history. I am the last Targaryen, and I will take back what is mine. Varys inclined his head, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Your dragons, Your Grace, are the greatest wild card in this game. The Lannisters may have secured their legacy with these children, but they do not have dragons. That is something they cannot anticipate, nor can they defend against it. Daenerys smiled, the firelight casting a fierce glow across her face, igniting her eyes with a look both determined and dangerous. Then let them clutch their legacies tightly, dreaming of a dynasty that will span the ages. Let Tywin think he can build a world where the Lannisters rule unchallenged. By the time I am finished, there will be no legacy left for them to inherit. She moved to the window, her gaze sweeping over Meereen, the city that had become her stronghold and training ground, but only a stepping stone toward her ultimate goal. Beyond the vast desert, beyond the rolling waves of the narrow sea, lay Westeros. The true prize. Her birthright. The land where her ancestors once ruled and where she intended to rule again. The Iron Throne wasn't just a symbol of power, it was a promise to reclaim her family's legacy and a vow to restore justice to a fractured realm. I will return to Westeros, she said softly, her voice edged with steel, each word a vow. And I will take what is mine by fire and blood. Tywin Lannister cannot stop what's coming. Varys stepped forward, his expression as enigmatic as ever. There is more, Your Grace. A letter arrived just this morning from Lord Tyrion. He reports progress with Lord Robb Stark. They are willing to meet with you. Daenerys looked sharply at him, her eyes alight with a mix of hope and challenge. You mean? It's time, Your Grace, Barristan confirmed, his own voice filled with quiet conviction. Her heart beat faster at the thought. Tyrion had worked tirelessly to open a path to the north, a land loyal to no one, especially not to a Lannister or Targaryen, but Tyrion's message hinted at a change. Does he say anything else? Varys shook his head. No, I'm afraid not. His letter was vague. He says the Starks have terms, but they are willing to speak only in person. He believes their loyalty is within reach, if we can meet their conditions. Daenerys took in the words, imagining the wolf banner of the North allied with her own dragons, their forces combining strength for a reckoning that could finally reclaim her homeland. Her voice softened, and she glanced back to her council. Then we make preparations. If the Starks are ready to listen, we must be ready to answer. Turning back to the window, Daenerys let her gaze sweep over the vast, sprawling city of Meereen, bathed in the soft amber light of dawn. Every street, every building bore the marks of her fight for justice, a city liberated from the chains of cruelty and bloodshed, its people free to walk unburdened, its walls strong and towering as if honoring her unyielding resolve. This place had been her proving ground, the crucible that had forged her into a queen. But beyond the glittering domes of Meereen lay her true destiny. Across the churning sea waited a kingdom held captive by the very forces that had torn her family from power, and a throne, her throne, awaiting its rightful queen. For years, she had dreamed of it, envisioned the Iron Throne, cold yet gleaming, under her touch. Now that dream no longer felt distant, it felt inevitable. She could almost feel the cool metal beneath her hands and hear the whisper of Westeros calling her home. It's time to go home, she said, her voice barely more than a breath, yet filled with a promise that resounded through the quiet chamber. Barristan and Varys exchanged glances, knowing the weight of that word, home. For Daenerys, it was more than a place, it was a promise, a destiny she would fulfill not just for herself, but for all those who had been trampled, silenced, and broken by the power-hungry forces of Westeros. Grey Worm, Daenerys called, her voice echoing through the hall with quiet authority. Prepare the Unsullied to move. And Daario, gather the shipmasters, inform them that we sail by week's end, no later. Tell my blood riders to ready themselves as well, They may hesitate at the thought of crossing open water, but we don't have the luxury of doubt. Her tone softened, almost as if addressing them directly. Remind them that the blood of the dragon rides with them. Grey Worm gave a firm nod, his unflinching loyalty clear in his gaze as he strode out, already planning the swift mobilization of the Unsullied. Dario, with his usual roguish grin, inclined his head and headed out to the docks. The preparations would be quick and relentless. When the chamber doors closed behind her advisors, Daenerys moved back to the head of the table, her fingertips tracing the carved edges of the dark wood. She settled into her seat, her gaze sharp as it shifted from one face to the next. The flickering torchlight cast shadows across her features, deepening her resolve as she spoke. Tell me, what do we know of Westeros beyond the Northerners' intentions? Where do the others stand in this struggle? Barristan spoke first, his tone grave. It is a tangled web, Your Grace. The Iron Islands, led by House Greyjoy, have been weakened by a power struggle. Yara Greyjoy commands her fleet and is formidable, but her claim is contested by her uncle, Euron. If you were to pledge your support to her after claiming the throne, it could cement her allegiance. However, Euron is cunning and unpredictable. Should he gain control, he would make a dangerous enemy, aligning himself with whomever served his own ambitions. Daenerys narrowed her eyes, already envisioning the Greyjoy fleet, the Ironborn ships slicing through the waters like daggers. The Ironborn's loyalty, however fleeting, could be a powerful asset. An alliance with Yara could be of great value, she agreed, considering the political complexity of such an allegiance. Varys, standing by the firelight, nodded but added with caution. It will not be easy to earn Yara's loyalty. Her brother, Theon, was executed by Lord Stark for his crimes against the North, a wound that has not yet healed. Yara may resist any bond with House Stark. Winning her over would require significant assurances and perhaps the offer of vengeance against those who betrayed her family. Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table, eyes dark with contemplation. If we can promise her security and the strength to defend her claim, Yara may yet prove loyal. Write to her. I want to know what she would ask for in return for an alliance. Varys inclined his head in agreement, and Barristan continued. House Martell has already pledged themselves to you. Tristan Martell leads in title, though his uncle Oberyn is the true force within House Martell. His resentment for House Lannister, especially for Tywin, is widely known. His hatred is fierce, and his loyalty should remain strong. Daenerys' gaze sharpened. What of Myrcella Baratheon? She is married to Tristan, is she not? I want no lingering Lannister ties to weaken our position. Varys nodded. Indeed, Your Grace. The Princess Myrcella, now Tristan's wife, bore him a daughter last year. She is bound to her husband and child, and her loyalty, therefore, should be secured. It would take a lot for her to abandon them and return home. Oberyn would have ensured as much. Daenerys absorbed the information with a growing sense of control, her fingers laced together as she thought through Oberyn's promise of support. Write to Oberyn as well, she commanded. Assure him that his losses will be avenged when I take the throne. His vengeance will find justice, and House Martell will have their satisfaction. Barristan nodded and continued. Then there are Houses Tully and Arryn. They have long followed the lead of the Starks and will likely align with Robb Stark's wishes. Varys offered a knowing look. Edmure Tully is a man of little strength and would defer to his nephew. He will submit rather than risk challenge. As for House Arryn, Robin has come of age but remains limited in judgment. His mother, Lady Lysa, still controls the Eyrie. Her loyalty is tentative, she may seek to avoid involvement altogether. But her own history with House Stark may influence her. A gentle nudge should bring her to our side. Daenerys' eyes glinted as she nodded, already formulating plans. To secure the loyalty of the Vale would tighten her grip on the eastern borders of Westeros. With the Riverlands, the Vale, and the North united, she would surround the Lannister forces in King's Landing from all sides. Lord Robin remains unwed, correct? Barristan suggested delicately. If you could assist with finding the right match, his loyalty could become quite dependable. Exactly, Daenerys said, a glint of strategy in her gaze. Arrange to reach out to Lady Lysa. Let her know that in joining my cause, the Vale would find stability, not chaos. As her advisors moved to carry out her orders, Varys added another consideration. The Tyrells, naturally, remain aligned with the crown. With Margaery as Tommen's queen, their alliance stands firm. The Reach, therefore, remains loyal to King Tommen. Daenerys's mouth hardened. And what of House Baratheon? What of Stannis? Barristan's expression grew grim. House Baratheon remains divided. Stannis has lost much of his power and hides, waiting for a chance to strike. But he is resolute and will not easily surrender his claim. While Tommen controls a portion of the Stormlands, Stannis's forces still hide within the mountains, biding their time. Eventually, we will face him as well. Then so be it, Daenerys replied, her voice filled with finality. Stannis Baratheon clings to a shadow, and even shadows cannot stand against fire and blood. Let him come if he dares. The room fell silent as Daenerys's gaze swept over her council, the weight of her purpose burning within her. She had freed cities, toppled tyrants, and built an army ready to reclaim her home. She had seen betrayal and unwavering loyalty. She would need both wisdom and ferocity to navigate the trials before her. But one thing remained unwavering within her: the Iron Throne would be hers. And those who stood in her way would soon know the strength of her fire. Send word to each and every one of them, Daenerys commanded, her gaze fierce and unwavering. Reach out to every house, every lord, and every ally who might yet be swayed to our side. Offer them the promise of justice, security, or vengeance, whatever speaks to their hearts, whatever they desire most. Let them see what loyalty to me will bring. She paused, her hand brushing the cool, carved wood of the table, fingers drumming as she weighed her next words carefully. But she continued, her voice low and steely, do not extend an invitation until you are absolutely certain. Study their responses. Learn who whispers of hesitation, who speaks with true resolve, and who seems ready to bend the knee. Only when we have reason to trust their intentions, when every hesitation has been examined, only then, and no sooner, will we invite them to Dragonstone to meet me in person. Daenerys's gaze flickered with the glimmer of firelight as she lifted her chin, her tone fierce and resolute. When they come, they will witness my strength, my resolve, and they will know that my blood is true. I will not be just another claimant. Like Aegon before me, I will be the flame that cannot be extinguished, and I will take what is mine. Westeros will remember the Targaryen legacy. The quiet confidence in her voice left her advisors still, each feeling the weight of her words as they resonated through the chamber. Daenerys was no longer just the young girl who had been exiled and cast aside, she was a queen, a conqueror poised to reclaim her birthright. Those who joined her would find their place in her new world, and those who resisted would learn what it meant to defy the blood of the dragon. Chapter 53, Robb 16. Chapter text. Robb 16. Each second stretched on endlessly since Robb Stark had learned the grim truth of the White Walkers. The northern wind seemed colder, heavier with the weight of what was coming. In a heartbeat, all the small matters that had occupied his thoughts, appointing a new stable hand, choosing the right swordsmaster for his son, Torrhen, seemed trivial, like scattered leaves before a hurricane. What good were teachers and horsekeepers if the living couldn't even survive the approaching storm? His mind kept circling back to Torrhen, his young son, and the weight of love and fear that accompanied each thought of him. Torrhen, with his bold little steps and his curious eyes, would one day grow tall and fierce, a Stark worthy of Winterfell and the ancient blood of their line. Robb had pictured his boy as a man many times, a leader, a protector, someone who could make the North proud. He imagined the friends Torrhen might make, the battles he might fight, the victories he might win, and the kindness he would show his people. Robb wanted to see that future so fiercely that it hurt, like a wound he couldn't soothe. But now, the image of his son's future felt fragile, like a candle caught in an icy wind. The White Walkers would not pause for honor, nor would they spare his boy. If the living could not unite against this unnatural force, the halls of Winterfell would go silent, and Torrhen's bright laugh would become a mere memory, scattered in the snowdrifts. Robb clenched his fists, feeling the old stone of Winterfell beneath his feet, grounding him. He had to fight, had to do everything in his power to give his son a chance. The name of Stark had withstood the ravages of time and war, he would not let it vanish to the horrors rising in the north. No matter how impossible, how bleak, he would face this storm, for his son, for his family, and for the land he loved. Roslyn had asked him countless times what troubled him, her voice soft yet insistent, concern etched deeply into her expression. She had sensed the weight he bore, the shadow of something dark and unspeakable pressing down on him, but each time she asked, he found himself unable to answer. How could he tell her? How could he speak of creatures that belonged in ghost stories, tales whispered in the darkest hours of the night? He wasn't even sure she'd believe him. And if she did, how would he face the fear that would inevitably bloom in her eyes, the horror he himself struggled to accept? He'd watched Roslyn grow from a quiet girl into a woman that the North could rally behind, a lady who held herself with both strength and grace, someone his people respected and trusted. She had weathered the storms of the past alongside him, standing by his side when the North itself had felt as fragile as frost on a wind open. She'd proven herself time and again, taking on the burden of their people, learning the ways of Winterfell, even in the face of the bitterness many held toward her family's name. Yet this news, this unnatural terror creeping from beyond the wall, was different. It was more than any man or woman should have to bear. Telling her that the dead themselves were marching south with an endless hunger, felt as if it would shatter the steady life they had carefully built together. He feared that her brave resolve might waver under the weight of it, that the knowledge of such a foe would steal her peace and shake her to the core. And if it broke her, he did not know if he'd have the strength to rebuild her. The truth of the White Walkers was a burden he was barely able to carry himself. But the thought of her carrying it with him, how would they bear it together? Robb. A voice called softly from the doorway, slicing through the quiet of the pre-dawn hours. Robb looked up from the stack of neglected papers before him, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. It was early, so early that the sky beyond the narrow windows was still dark, the faintest blush of morning just beginning to touch the horizon. He hadn't slept, haunted by thoughts of the White Walkers and the looming darkness that made all other troubles seem trivial. But seeing his brother in the doorway gave him an anchor in the storm. Jon stepped inside, the dim light casting long shadows on his tired face. He looked weary, as if the burdens he carried were tangible weights on his shoulders. "I'm leaving," Jon said, his voice low but firm. "Now." The words stilled something in Robb. He rose from his chair, concern narrowing his gaze. "What's happened?" Jon's jaw clenched, a shadow passing over his face. "A letter arrived from Castle Black. Stannis has seized the castle, taken it as his own stronghold in my absence. He's using it as his base. I need to go back, now, before he claims it and my men for himself." Robb absorbed this, nodding slowly. "I understand," he replied, stepping around the desk to stand closer to his brother. "The Night's Watch cannot afford to be a pawn in his game." Jon's eyes softened with gratitude, but Robb could sense the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He knew that this mission was more than just duty to Jon, it was a calling, a fight for his very identity and loyalty to the Watch he'd vowed to serve. Robb wanted to tell him to stay, to remind him that they were stronger together, but he could see the resolve in Jon's gaze, the same steely determination he'd admired since they were boys. "I'll talk to him. I'll try to make him see reason," Jon said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of resolve. "Stannis is a man of honor, and if I can make him believe, he'll understand how important our fight is. Surely he'll see that this is not the time to make a claim for the throne." Robb nodded but didn't look convinced. He may be reasonable, but Stannis is nothing if not stubborn. He's carried the belief that the throne is his by right for 6 long years, years in which he's been pushed into exile, deprived of his home, mocked and belittled. He's lost much, and men like that aren't easily convinced to set aside their vengeance. He may see reason, but it won't come without a fight." Jon's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed as he replied, "I don't expect him to lay down his sword, only to turn its edge in another direction, for the time being. The Lannisters can wait. The dead cannot." Robb looked at his brother, a deep, searching expression on his face. "Be safe, Jon. I can't face what's to come without you, brother." Jon's gaze softened, but something in his expression flickered, as if he wanted to say something more, something unsaid simmering just below the surface. For a brief moment, Robb thought he would speak, but instead, Jon held his silence. Robb, sensing the weight of what lay unsaid, took a breath and turned to more practical matters. "Go to the Castellan, have him rouse the men I promised you. They'll be ready to leave by first light. Jon's gratitude was clear in his eyes, and he nodded. Thank you, Rob. I received an offer for help, as well, from your father. Rob's brows lifted in surprise. I think he feels that he owes me something. Or maybe he just doesn't want to face the day the dead arrive without doing all he can. Jon paused, looking thoughtful. He wants to settle whatever debts he believes he holds before the long night returns. Rob was silent, absorbing this unexpected turn. Ned Stark was a man whose sense of duty was as unyielding as the wall itself. If he felt he owed Jon anything, then there was more to the tale than he'd ever shared. Keep each other safe, Rob said, with a hand of his brother's shoulder. And I'll see you soon. Jon offered him a soft, knowing smile, one that needed no words, before turning to leave. Rob watched him go, the quiet sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. Left alone, he returned to his seat, feeling the heavy weight of the responsibilities settling onto his shoulders once more. The next few weeks would demand all the wisdom and caution he could muster. Westeros was the most volatile that it had been since Joffrey's reign. With Stannis taking up his campaign again from Castle Black, the fragile peace they'd clung to for years felt close to shattering. Jon had a daunting task ahead, convincing a man as unyielding as Stannis to stand down, to set aside his claim in the name of the greater threat they all faced. It would take all of Jon's skill and tact to make Stannis see sense before he threw the North into chaos. And if that weren't enough, Daenerys Targaryen, the last of the dragons, had begun her march homeward. Word from the east made it clear, she was gathering her forces to sail for Westeros, intent on claiming her birthright. Her army was formidable, her influence sweeping across Essos like a wildfire. Rob could imagine the turmoil her arrival would stir. If Tywin felt Tommen's claim to power was threatened, he wouldn't hesitate to call their banners. Westeros would be plunged into another war, one that could leave them in no state to face the larger threat. Jon had to succeed. He had to make Stannis see that the true enemy lay beyond the wall, an enemy neither throne nor crown could hold back. And Daenerys, well, they would deal with her when she arrived. As dawn broke over the horizon, a pale light washed over Winterfell, casting long shadows across the familiar stone. Rob stood alone on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, feeling the weight of generations beneath him. This was where his father had often stood, gazing out over the people he had sworn to protect. The memory of it pulled at Rob, a fierce pride mixed with an unsettling doubt. He felt like an intruder, a pretender standing in a place that had belonged to Eddard Stark, a man of unshakable principles and strength. Yet here he was, watching over his own men as they readied themselves for an uncertain fate. Below, the men stood lined up in orderly rows, armor gleaming faintly in the first light of morning. They waited, stoic but somber, knowing little of the true horror that awaited them at the wall. Many of them had likely dismissed the rumors as ghost stories. Tales of White Walkers seemed impossible, whispers meant to frighten children. But soon, they would be forced to confront those whispered horrors. A soft hand came to rest on his arm, warm even in the chill of the morning. Rob turned to find Roslyn beside him, still in her nightgown and a thin overcoat hastily thrown over her shoulders, her face pale in the early light. "Gods, woman," he said, a half-laugh breaking the tension in his voice. "What are you trying to do? Catch your death out here?" He shrugged his own heavy cloak off and draped it over her shoulders, pulling it close around her. The cloak dwarfed her, the edges dragging along the stone floor, but he held it firmly, tucking it snug around her. "The noise woke me. I couldn't let you stand out here alone," she replied, a determined look softening her face as she studied the lines of men below. Her voice was steady, but he could see the worry behind her eyes, a reflection of the fear he carried with him. "Thank you," he murmured, his hand lingering on her shoulder. She grounded him, reminding him of why he was fighting, for the future they had built together, for the family they hoped to protect, for the lives that would carry on beyond the war. Roslyn looked at him, her gaze fierce yet kind. "They'll come home, Rob. The gods will watch over them." Her words, though softly spoken, struck a chord within him. She simply stood beside him, her presence a balm to his own troubled heart. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers as the first true light of dawn touched the castle walls. For this brief moment, in the quiet before the storm, he allowed himself to believe in her words, to hope that the men below would see Winterfell again, that the world would hold together just a little longer. Rob's gaze lingered on his father as Eddard Stark mounted a black stallion, the aging yet resolute figure now flanked by Jon and Gendry. The trio made a striking sight in the cool dawn light, each man focused, determined, and ready to face whatever the North threw at them. Robb exhaled slowly, his brows knitting together in a mix of pride and frustration. "I don't understand him," he murmured, his voice a blend of admiration and bewilderment. "For years, he's said how he's grown tired of the fighting, how he wants nothing more than to live out his days here, with us and the children. He speaks of peace, of wanting to see Torrhen grow up, he wants to see Arya as a wife and an explorer, Sansa as a mother." And yet, his words trailed off, and he shook his head. "And yet, he jumps on a horse without a second thought, ready to ride into the unknown, without so much as waiting to be asked." Roslyn's hand tightened around his, her gaze soft as she watched the departing men. "Robb, please let me in. Tell me what's happening, this is more than just Stannis. Lighten your load." Robb felt his heart tug as he looked at Roslyn's earnest face, the worry softening her features, her hand warm and steady in his. He wanted to shield her from the weight of it all, but Roslyn had stood by him through the storms of war and loss. She deserved the truth, and he needed someone to carry it with him, to remind him of why he kept going. He drew in a slow breath, glancing back out at the emptying courtyard, then returned his gaze to his wife. "It's hard to put into words," he started, his voice quiet but intense. "The dead are rising in the north, Roslyn. White Walkers. The old stories, legends I heard as children, they're real." Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she held his gaze, steady and unwavering. "This isn't just another war. It isn't armies and banners. It's a threat to all of us, to everything we know," he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. "My father is riding north with Jon to confront Stannis, to get him to stand down and maybe even join us until they are defeated, but I can't shake this feeling, this fear. If they don't come back, if they can't hold them back." The words trailed off, and he swallowed hard, his throat tight. He could barely even allow himself to picture it, his father and Jon, swallowed up by an army of the dead. Yet that vision haunted his every waking thought, a shadow pressing down on his every breath. Roslyn's face softened, and she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him. She rested her head against his chest, and he felt her warmth, solid and real, grounding him in the present, even as his thoughts wandered to far grimmer futures. "You're not alone in this, Robb," she murmured, her voice a gentle reassurance against the storm within him. "Winterfell stands, and you stand at its heart. Whatever comes, we face it together." He exhaled, releasing a tension he hadn't even known he was holding. "I just don't want this for Torrhen. I wanted him to know peace, to grow up without the weight of a war hanging over him, without the fear of what's beyond our walls." Roslyn looked up at him, her eyes fierce, filled with love and defiance. "He has known peace, Robb, and he will know it again. Because of men like you and your father. Because you're willing to fight, even when you're weary of it." Her words settled over him, both a comfort and a reminder of the burden he carried, a burden they all shared, though not always equally. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, feeling a surge of gratitude he couldn't quite put into words. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. "For understanding. For staying by me." She gave him a small, brave smile, though he could see the fear lurking in her eyes, as well. "Always, Robb. Now, come back inside with me. We may have battles to fight, but right now, let's have breakfast together, with our family. Let's give Torrhen one more morning of peace." He nodded, realizing how much he needed that, just one more moment to hold on to the warmth and comfort of his home, to keep it close as a shield against the dark days that lay ahead. They walked back into Winterfell, side by side, ready to face the morning and whatever else the future might bring. _____________________________________________________________________________________ A week had stretched into a tense, agonizing silence with no word from either Jon or his father. Each morning, Robb would rise before dawn and scan the horizon, hoping for a raven or a rider carrying news from the wall. Yet, each day brought nothing, the only answer a cold wind that whispered of uncertainty. In their absence, he'd poured himself into fortifying Winterfell, rallying the North for the threat he knew would come. Every able-bodied man and even some women had been called to prepare for battle, farmers instructed to bring what food they could spare from the season's last harvest, and blacksmiths were working from dawn till dusk, their forges churning out weapons at an unyielding pace. Winterfell had opened its gates to the northern families seeking refuge, the great hall and spare chambers filled with children and the elderly, those too vulnerable to face the approaching storm. He felt the weight of each decision, each order, pressing down on him with the certainty of a gathering snowfall. Every hour he could feel winter growing stronger, the days shortening, the cold settling in deeper. And yet, while he fortified his walls and trained his men for what was to come, a part of him was consumed by fear, for the unknown, both in the north and beyond. It wasn't until a raven arrived late one night, its parchment emblazoned with the gold lion of House Lannister, that he was snapped back to another looming threat. The threat he'd almost allowed himself to forget in the midst of the chaos. Robb broke the Lannister seal with steady fingers, though his pulse quickened with each movement. He unfolded the letter slowly, feeling the weight of the words within before he even began reading them. Tywin's message was meticulously composed, each phrase a carefully balanced warning and command, a challenge, veiled in the tone of a reminder. To Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell it began, the ink as dark and sharp as the man who'd written it. I trust you understand the continued duty of the North to honor the crown, now and in all times. I will not insult your understanding of loyalty, nor the value your family has placed on it since the days of old. Tywin's formalities grew cold and unyielding, each word a clear assertion of dominance as he outlined the stakes. Stannis Baratheon has once again reared his head, and word has it that he is bolstered by your bastard brother, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and, most troubling, your father. That same father who was so graciously allowed to live out his days in peace following his previous treachery, and now he stands among those who, from all accounts, would set themselves against King Tommen. Robb felt a tightening in his chest, his father's shadow cast even here, in Tywin's words. Should you choose to stand alongside the crown to squash these threats, perhaps there will yet be mercy for your father and brother. Send word to them swiftly, before they take further steps against the king, and perhaps their lives might be spared. But the next line left Robb bracing himself, the sharp language of Tywin Lannister now inescapably clear. The crown's forces, led by myself, Sir Jaime, and Sir Loras, have already departed King's Landing, and we expect to be joined by your uncle Ed Murtully's forces at Riverrun. From there, we anticipate your northern banners meeting us at the border. Signed, Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King, Lord of Casterly Rock. Robb's mind raced, a flare of anger warring with dread. Tywin was already mobilizing, Jaime, Loras, and the might of the Reach and the Westerlands were moving northward as he read these very words. His fists clenched as he reread the ultimatum, his jaw set in defiance. Yet Tywin's mention of his father and Jon hit like a blade's twist. He knew his brother and father wouldn't have sided with Stannis when the true threat laid at their feet. They wouldn't turn against their plan with no forewarning, but if they were allowing Stannis refuge at the wall, Tywin would see that as condemning as giving him an army. His chest tightened as he thought of the risks they would face. They were no longer just facing an ancient threat from beyond the wall, they were now entangled in a war that would put them at odds with every force of the south, including Tywin's unstoppable machine. Without realizing it, Robb had crushed the letter in his fist, the wax seal cracked and the parchment crumpled beyond recognition. He stood there, trying to draw in a steady breath, fighting the growing storm that Tywin's words had ignited within him. Robb. Roslyn's voice came softly from the doorway, a gentle presence cutting through the silence that had settled around him. Her voice, warm and concerned, was a quiet balm against the fury roiling in his chest. He turned to her, his expression grim, but softened at the sight of her. She stepped closer, her eyes flicking from his face to the crumpled letter in his hand. Concern etched lines into her brow. Is it news from Jon? From your father, she asked, her tone filled with both dread and curiosity. He looked down at the letter he'd mangled, a mess of Lannister words and threats, and nodded, exhaling slowly. No. It's a warning from Tywin. His words are as sharp as his blade. He wants me to reaffirm my fealty to Tommen, to promise northern support in squashing Stannis, and to turn my back on my father and Jon. His voice was quiet but laced with a raw anger, the words clipped. Roslyn reached out, resting a comforting hand on his arm. And if you don't, she asked, her eyes searching his face. He hesitated, struggling to find words that could convey the sheer ruthlessness in Tywin's letter. then he'll march on the north. He's already mobilizing forces from the south. Jaime and Loras Tyrell lead his armies, and they'll meet my uncle's men at Riverrun. He expects us to join him at the border. He laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in his voice. He offers mercy for my father and Jon if I fall in line, but we both know Tywin's promises are empty as dead men's whispers. Her hand tightened on his arm, her face filled with a quiet strength. You don't have to bear this alone, Robb, she whispered. We'll stand behind you, whatever comes. The north has faced worse storms. He looked into her eyes, finding some measure of calm in the resolve he saw there. He said softly, but not with threats closing in from both sides. Chapter 54, Cersei 3. Chapter text. Cersei 3. Cersei awoke before dawn, her usual routine keeping her restless thoughts company in the dark. Beside her, Jaime lay in peaceful slumber, his golden hair tousled, his breathing even. She knew she needed to wake him soon. Before long, one of her handmaidens would arrive with breakfast, and Jaime would have to return to his own chambers before anyone noticed his absence. But still, she hesitated. For a moment, she allowed herself the indulgence of watching him. So much had changed in the 5 years since Joffrey's death, yet Jaime remained her one constant, the only thing that hadn't slipped through her fingers like sand. Her mind wandered to Tommen, the sweet boy who had once clung to her skirts and hung on her every word as though the sun itself rose and set with her command. When he had first taken the throne, he had listened to her above all others, even her father. She had reveled in it, believing that as long as Tommen needed her, she would retain her power. But that golden age had ended the moment he became a man. Marriage had been the first crack in the illusion. As his relationship with Margaery deepened, Cersei could feel him pulling away. It began subtly. Tommen no longer broke his fast with her, choosing instead to dine with Margaery in the king's chambers. Then came the dinners with visiting dignitaries, where Margaery sat beside him, whispering in his ear, leaving no room for Cersei at the table. And finally, the inevitable, the day she was told to vacate the queen's chambers. Cersei had clung to those chambers like a lioness protecting her den, believing that as the queen mother, she was entitled to them. But the truth had been undeniable. Margaery, radiant and clever, had long since claimed the role of queen in the hearts and minds of the court. Her father, Tywin, had been the one to deliver the news with his characteristic coldness. Your station as Dowager Queen is honored, but it does not entitle you to overreach your place, he had said, his voice devoid of sympathy. The new chambers she had been assigned were smaller, tucked into a quieter wing of the Red Keep. The gilded grandeur of her former life had been stripped away, replaced with modest tapestries and a bed far too narrow for her tastes. Her father had been deliberate in his cruelty, reminding her that they were far more fitting of her diminished station. Most galling of all, the chambers were on the opposite side of the castle from Tommen and Margaery, a move she knew was orchestrated by the queen herself. In the years since, her power had slipped away piece by piece, like a slow bleed she couldn't stop. First, Tommen had reduced her household staff, claiming it was to trim excess spending. Then came the humiliation of her accounts being monitored, her father's doing, of course. When she had dared to challenge the limits placed on her spending, Tywin had dismissed her concerns with a patronizing remark about wearing her gowns twice, as if she were a merchant's wife and not a lion of Casterly Rock. But the final, devastating blow had come when Tommen announced Margaery's pregnancy. He had shared the news with a beaming smile, his joy unmistakable, while Cersei sat frozen in place. She had known the day would come, Margaery's ambition ensured it, but hearing it was like a blade twisting in her gut. The knowledge that her days as the most important woman in Tommen's life were over made her feel mortal in a way she never had before. One day, Margaery would strip even the title of king's mother from her, relegating her to a relic of a bygone era. She imagined herself cast off to Casterly Rock, where she would endure the insult of seeing Tyrion as its lord, or worse, left to rot in the capital, locked in some forgotten tower, her name fading from memory. She thought of the Targaryen queens of old, women like Daenerys Velaryon or Elinor Penrose, whose names were little more than footnotes in history. Who remembers what became of them? She thought bitterly. One day, that will be me, a name whispered in passing, forgotten by time. Her hand clenched the coverlay, her nails biting into the fabric. This was not how her story was supposed to end. She had clawed her way to power, endured humiliation and betrayal, all to ensure her children's place in the world. Yet here she was, slowly being eclipsed by a girl who had barely lived long enough to understand what power truly was. "Cersei," Jaime murmured, stirring beside her. His voice was soft, groggy with sleep. She looked down at him, her stormy thoughts momentarily quieted. He was still here, her golden knight, her twin, her love. The only one who had ever truly been hers. For now, at least, she still had him. But for how much longer? Cersei Lannister was a woman who had lost too much already, and the thought of losing Jaime, of losing everything, made her resolve harden like iron. She would not go quietly into obscurity. "Wake up," Cersei snapped, her voice sharp and cold as winter steel. She shook Jaime's shoulder, harder this time, her patience already wearing thin. "Myrcella arrives today, and I will not be denied the opportunity to see my daughter for the first time in years because you couldn't be bothered to leave my bed before sunrise." Jaime stirred groggily, blinking against the faint pre-dawn light filtering through the chamber's heavy curtains. "You're charming as always," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. He stretched lazily, as though they had all the time in the world, and it made her blood boil. "This isn't a game, Jaime," she hissed, stepping back and crossing her arms tightly across her chest. Her golden hair tumbled over her shoulders, her face taut with frustration. "Do you think I'll risk the whispers, the rumors, just so you can have a few more minutes of rest? If anyone saw you here, if anyone suspected," she cut herself off, unable to finish the thought. The consequences didn't need to be spoken aloud, they loomed over them both like a shadow. Jaime pushed himself upright, running a hand through his tousled hair, the smirk fading as he met her steely gaze. "No one will see me," he said, his tone softening. "I know the way, Cersei." "That's not the point," she shot back, her voice low but no less fierce. "Myrcella arrives today, Jaime. My daughter. My only daughter. And I will not allow anything to overshadow her homecoming. Not whispers in the court, not your carelessness, nothing." Her voice faltered for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down like a crushing tide. It had been years since she had last seen Myrcella, 3 long years since their visit to Dorne, a visit she now regretted with every fiber of her being. They had gone to witness her daughter marry Tristan Martell, a union solidified by necessity and politics following the death of Prince Doran and Tristan's sudden rise as the new Prince of Dorne. Cersei had despised every second of her time in that sun-scorched land. The oppressive heat, the incessant chirping of insects, the cloying sweetness of Dornish wine, everything about it had grated on her nerves. She had spent most of her days longing to return to the familiar stone walls of the Red Keep, to the cool breezes of the Blackwater Bay, and to the politics of King's Landing where she thrived. She hadn't appreciated the fleeting time she'd had with Myrcella during that visit. She hadn't savored each precious moment as she watched her daughter step into womanhood, becoming a wife before her very eyes. Instead, she'd let herself be consumed by discomfort and irritation, resenting the Dornish traditions and the eyes that followed her every move as the infamous Dowager Queen. Now, she hated herself for that. The Myrcella she had seen then was not the doe-eyed girl with chubby cheeks she had kissed goodbye when she was sent away years earlier. That Myrcella was gone. In her place stood a young woman, beautiful, radiant, and poised in a way that seemed almost foreign to Cersei. Myrcella had carried herself with a serenity Cersei could never manage, her every movement a testament to the life she had carved out for herself in Dorne. She had looked every inch a princess, a figure perfectly at home in the gilded, sun-drenched courts of Sunspear. And now, Myrcella was coming home. Changed again. No longer simply a princess but a mother herself, returning to King's Landing not as the shy, obedient daughter Cersei had sent away but as a woman with a life and family of her own. Cersei's heart clenched painfully at the thought. What would Myrcella think of her now, after so many years apart? Did she even think of her at all? Did she tell her own daughter stories of her grandmother, the Lioness of Lannister, or did Cersei's memory fade in her mind like a figure shrouded in mist? Jaime swung his legs over the edge of the bed, watching her closely. He could see the cracks beneath her cold exterior, the tremor in her voice, the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. He stood, closing the distance between them, his hand brushing against her arm. "You've missed her," he said simply. Cersei stiffened at the touch, refusing to let herself soften. Of course I have, she said, her voice sharp as ever. She's my daughter. Then let today be hers, Jaime said softly, his voice steady but resolute. Focus on Myrcella and her child. Don't let Margaery, the council, or even me distract you from what truly matters. Cersei pulled away, turning her back to him. Get dressed, she said curtly, her tone brooking no argument. And go. Jaime hesitated for a moment, then sighed and began to gather his clothes from where they were strewn across the floor. As he dressed, Cersei stood by the window, her arms still crossed tightly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The first light of dawn was creeping into the sky, painting the Red Keep in muted golds and oranges. Somewhere out there, Myrcella was drawing closer, her ship cutting through the waves on its journey home. Cersei closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. Jaime was right about one thing, today wasn't about him or her fears or the endless tightrope she walked in court. Today was about Myrcella. Her daughter was coming home, and she would not let anything, or anyone, ruin that moment. Cersei entered the great hall with Jaime at her side, clad in his gleaming Kingsguard armor, and Qyburn trailing behind in his somber black robes. The sight before her was a painful reminder of how much the Red Keep had transformed over the years since Margaery Tyrell had ascended as queen. Gone were the cold, austere trappings of her rule, in their place, the hall radiated a soft, almost cloying warmth. The banners of Tommen still dominated the room, bearing the sigil that merged the Lannister lion and the Baratheon stag. Yet now they were accompanied by others displaying the golden rose of House Tyrell, their vibrant green and gold weaving themselves into the fabric of the castle's identity. Elaborate floral arrangements lined the walls, fresh blooms perfuming the air. Queen Margaery had insisted on weekly deliveries from the city's finest florists, with an additional bounty of roses shipped directly from the Reach. The lords and ladies of court had been effusive in their praise, murmuring about how much livelier and more welcoming the Red Keep had become under Margaery's touch. Cersei had smiled through clenched teeth each time, offering empty words of agreement, though in truth, each compliment felt like a dagger to her pride. This castle wasn't meant to be warm. It wasn't a sanctuary for Margaery's schemes to take root and blossom like her precious flowers. The Red Keep was supposed to be a fortress, a cold, unyielding symbol of power and fear, a weapon against those who would threaten her family's hold on the Iron Throne. Her gaze swept over the hall, lingering on the floral displays and the Tyrell banners, and she forced herself to straighten her spine. This was still her castle, her family's legacy. And no amount of roses could ever change that. Tommen and Margaery stood side by side near the Iron Throne, the embodiment of a united crown. Margaery was resplendent in a golden gown, its intricate embroidery catching the light as it clung to her rounded belly. She rested one hand protectively over her swollen stomach, nearing her 8th month of pregnancy. The hall buzzed with anticipation, not only for the arrival of the Martells but also for the impending birth of the royal twins. This visit from the Southern Lords was to be the last public appearance Margaery would make before her confinement began. The risks were considerable, twins were always a delicate matter, and King Tommen, with Tywin's guidance, had insisted on assembling the best medical maesters from Highgarden to ensure her safety when the time came. Tommen himself was dressed in a green doublet with fine golden embroidery, the shade a subtle nod to his wife's house. He seemed to favor green more and more these days, Cersei noticed, as if aligning himself further with Margaery and the Tyrells with every stitch of his attire. She felt a sharp pang of loss as she watched him, a bittersweet cocktail of pride and resentment bubbling within her. It wasn't that she didn't love her son, she did, fiercely. But it pained her to see him this way, growing into a man she barely recognized. Where Joffrey had been a lion of Lannister through and through, with his sharp features and temper that mirrored Jaime's, Tommen was different. People often remarked on how much he resembled Robert or Renly in his build and demeanor, save for the Lannister coloring of golden hair and emerald eyes. The comparisons stung, no matter how impossible they were. He lacked Joffrey's fire, his raw, unrelenting force of will. Instead, Tommen was calm, thoughtful, and altogether too malleable, bending to Margaery's influence with little resistance. Cersei could see it in the way he looked at her, deferential, doting, like a boy still eager to please his mother but now with his heart and mind firmly under his wife's control. As she approached, flanked by Jaime and Qyburn, she studied the couple. Margaery leaned in slightly toward Tommen, whispering something that made him smile, a soft, easy smile that brought a faint flush to his cheeks. Circe's jaw tightened imperceptibly. That smile should have been hers to inspire, that comfort hers to give. Yet here she was, the Dowager Queen, watching from a distance as her son grew further away with every passing day. "Your Grace," Circe said with a carefully neutral tone, dipping her head slightly to her son and his queen. She hesitated, her gaze lingering just a moment too long on Margary's rounded stomach. Mother Tommen greeted warmly, his boyish enthusiasm still intact despite his growing responsibilities. "Queen Margary suggested you stand with us to greet Lord and Lady Martell." Circe's lips curved into a small, forced smile. "How kind of the Queen," she said, the edge in her voice so subtle that only Jaime, standing close by, might have detected it. "Of course," Margary replied with her usual poise, inclining her head graciously. Her hand drifted to her belly, stroking the curve of it in a gesture that seemed almost rehearsed. "Now that I am to be a mother myself, I couldn't imagine being separated from my children. The Princess Myrcella is your daughter as much as she is the king's sister. It is only right that you should be here to welcome her home." Circe's fingers tightened slightly on the fabric of her gown, though her expression betrayed nothing. Margary's words were honeyed, a picture of generosity and grace, but Circe recognized the undertone, the implicit reminder of who now held sway in Tommen's court. It was always like this with Margary, her kindness was a tool, a subtle blade designed to cut without leaving a mark. "You are most thoughtful, Your Grace," Circe replied smoothly. Her gaze flicked to Tommen, his boyish face alight with gratitude toward his wife, and her chest tightened. "It will be a joy to see Myrcella again after so long." "Indeed," Margary said, her tone bright. "I'm told she has flourished in Dawn, a true princess of Sunspear." Jaime, ever the quiet observer, broke the tension with a casual remark. "I'm sure Myrcella will be glad to see all of us together. Family is everything to her." Tommen nodded eagerly. "She's written as much. Myrcella speaks highly of Dawn and Tristan, but she's missed us, especially you, Mother." He gave Circe a bright smile, one that momentarily softened the ache in her heart. "This will be good for her." The herald's voice rang out through the great hall, crisp and commanding as it echoed against the vaulted ceilings. "Presenting their graces, Prince Tristan Martell and Princess Myrcella of Dawn, and their esteemed party." Every gaze turned toward the towering great doors, which groaned open with slow, deliberate grandeur. The Dawnish entourage entered, their arrival as striking as the sun rising over the desert sands. Myrcella led the way, her head held high, a picture of poise and elegance. She wore a flowing gown of golden yellow and crimson, the colors of House Martell, its fabric shimmering faintly in the light of the torches lining the hall. Her golden hair, now kissed by the sun and braided in the Dawnish style, framed her face, which bore a soft but determined smile. At her side, Tristan walked with effortless grace, his hand resting lightly on her elbow in a subtle yet unmistakable display of unity. His own attire was just as regal, his tunic was adorned with the blazing sun and spear of his house, and a finely wrought cape of red and gold draped across his shoulders. Behind them, Elaria Sand followed, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding as always. In her arms, she cradled a tiny bundle swaddled in rich fabrics of Martell crimson and orange. The babe, no older than 6 months, nestled peacefully against her chest, its small, delicate hand peeking out from the cloth. Circe's sharp eyes caught the details that would have escaped others, the child's sun-kissed skin, so like that of the Martells, and the faint tufts of blonde hair poking out from beneath the swaddling. The procession halted before the throne, and Myrcella's gaze swept across the room, her smile broadening as she saw her brother. She dipped into a practiced curtsy, her movements as fluid and graceful as the Dawnish waves. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying across the hall with measured confidence. "It is good to be home." Tommen stepped down from the dais, his face lighting up with a boyish grin. "Myrcella," he exclaimed, his enthusiasm momentarily dispelling the heavy formality of the court. He embraced her tightly, and Myrcella laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "Myrcella, you look wonderful," he said, stepping back to take her in. His gaze shifted to Tristan, and he extended a hand. "Prince Tristan, it's good to see you again. Thank you for taking care of my sister." Tristan inclined his head respectfully as they shook hands. "Your Grace, it has been my greatest honor. Myrcella is the light of dawn." Circe's stomach churned at the sentiment. The light of dawn, not of her own family. Elaria took a measured step forward, her dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and defiance. She moved with the grace of a woman accustomed to being watched, her presence commanding attention despite the softness of the moment. With a gentle motion, she passed the child into Tristan's arms, her fingers lingering on the baby's tiny hand before pulling away. "Your Grace," Tristan said, his voice steady but full of affection as he presented the infant to the throne. "May I present to you your niece, Princess Elia Martell, our daughter." The words hung in the air like a quiet declaration, heavy with meaning. He looked up, his eyes meeting Circe's for a brief moment, before turning his gaze back to the infant in his arms. Circe's breath caught in her throat. The baby's soft features were unmistakably Dornish, a reflection of Tristan's bloodline. But there was something else too, a lingering echo of something more, something that made Circe's stomach twist with unspoken emotion. Elia Martell. The name hit her like a weight in her chest, stirring long-buried memories, old wounds. The child's namesake, Elia Martell, had been the beloved sister of Prince Oberyn, murdered at the hands of the Lannisters in the wake of Robert's rebellion. That name, so familiar, carried with it a history Circe knew all too well. The Martells had never forgotten their grievances, and the pain of that loss ran deep in the blood of Dawn. But it was more than just a name. Elia Martell had been a woman, a princess, a mother, and the woman who had been taken from the world too soon by Tywin's commands. As Circe looked upon the infant, her gaze fell upon Elaria, who stood off to the side, her eyes not on the child or the king, but fixed squarely on Tywin. The older man, regal as always, stood silently in the gallery, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene unfolding before him. But Circe knew that beneath that calm facade, something was stirring. Elaria's stare was deliberate, her defiance sharp and undeniable. Tommen's smile was wide, his eyes gleaming with genuine warmth as he leaned forward, studying the small, sleeping form in Tristan's arms. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice filled with a childlike delight. He reached out a hand to gently touch the baby's tiny fingers, his expression softening as if the weight of the moment had momentarily swept away the responsibilities of kingship. "You've done so well, Myrcella. Father would be so proud." The mention of Robert struck Circe like a dagger, piercing the fragile calm she had worked so hard to maintain. Her body stiffened, her breath catching as her mind spiraled. She turned her gaze away from Tommen, her eyes flicking between Myrcella and the child, trying to steady herself. Would Robert have been proud? In her darker moments, when the bitterness of her past with Robert consumed her thoughts, she often wondered if the version of him she held in her mind, the brutal, uncaring man who had never once loved her, who had never been the king she had hoped for, was the true Robert. Had he truly been proud of Myrcella? Would Robert have been pleased to see Myrcella married to a high-born lord, living a life of status and respect? Would he have been proud to see her as a mother, surrounded by the trappings of the life Circe had so desperately wanted for her children? Or would he have still seen her as a pawn, a prize in a game that had long since moved beyond her? Shaking herself from her thoughts, Circe forced her breath to steady, and with deliberate, controlled movements, she stepped forward. She approached Tristan, who stood holding the child so gently it was as if he feared she might vanish if he touched her too firmly. He caught her eye, a silent question in his gaze. Myrcella, standing beside him, offered a subtle nod of approval, her expression soft yet knowing. Without hesitation, Tristan carefully passed the infant to Circe's waiting arms. The child was light, so small in her hands, and for a moment, Circe almost forgot where she was, who she was. She gazed down at the baby, the child of the Martells, of her daughter's union. Her fingers brushed against the child's soft skin, the delicate tufts of blonde hair peeking out from the swaddling cloth. "This is my granddaughter," she thought. The silence in the hall deepened, a strange hush falling over the room. Circe held the child close to her chest, her heart thudding in her ears. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, the Martells, the courtiers, even Tommen, whose gaze was now focused on her with a quiet intensity. The child's presence in her arms was almost too much to bear. She had never thought she would be here, holding the infant of her own flesh and blood, yet knowing full well that the child would always belong to Dawn. Circe paused, her voice catching. She forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "She's perfect. She has her mother's calm demeanor, Tristan said with a small chuckle, but her father's fire. A true Martell. Circe's grip on the child tightened ever so slightly. A true Martell. The words twisted like a dagger in her heart. Myrcella had become one of them, a Dornish princess, raising a child who would likely know more of Sunspear's halls than the Red Keep. A child who, despite the golden locks, might grow up to feel like a stranger to the Lannisters altogether. Mother. Myrcella's voice broke through Circe's spiraling thoughts. Circe looked down at the tiny princess in her arms for a moment longer, feeling a strange surge of pride swell in her chest, as though the child's very presence confirmed some long-awaited legacy of her own. But she couldn't allow herself to linger in that fleeting emotion for too long. She looked up, and the coldness she had always carried beneath her regal demeanor settled back into place. Her expression smoothed, softening just enough to give the appearance of warmth as she returned the baby to Myrcella. She will do House Martell proud, Circe said, her voice steady. And House Lannister. Myrcella's smile flickered for a heartbeat, the barest hesitation in her eyes before the practiced mask of composure returned. She nodded in agreement, but there was something in her gaze that suggested the weight of those words was heavier than Circe realized. Of course, Myrcella replied, her voice almost a whisper, as if the effort of agreeing with her mother had taken more out of her than she would admit. Tommen, ever eager to please and make his mark, placed a hand gently on Margaery's rounded belly, his eyes sparkling with youthful enthusiasm. Maybe in a few years, you could give her a brother, he said, the words tumbling out almost too quickly. An heir for Dorne, and then maybe Elia could find a throne of her own. Maybe with one of her cousins. His smile was infectious, his gaze shifting to Margaery, and everyone present could feel the implication hanging thick in the air. Even Circe, who often dismissed superstition, couldn't ignore the hint of discomfort that stirred in her gut. A Martell named Elia, married to the heir to the Iron Throne. Surely it would be unwise to tempt the gods with such an opportunity to repeat such a tragic tale from their history. She suppressed the thought, not wanting to show any sign of unease, but there was something about Tommen's youthful innocence in his ambitions that unsettled her. Before she could voice her thoughts, Tristan Martell's voice cut through the moment, sharp and assured. Elia is my heir, he said, his tone brooking no argument. He took a step forward, his posture straight and proud. In Dorne, we believe women make as good rulers as men. I could have 100 sons, and Elia will still take my place as the ruler of Dorne when the time comes. Tristan's gaze lingered on her, his expression calm, almost challenging. Surely you see what fine rulers women make, your grace, he continued, his voice steady, almost thoughtful. Surrounded by your wife, your sister, and your mother, 3 of the strongest women in Westeros, so I hear. Tommen's expression shifted from youthful enthusiasm to a flicker of confusion, his brows furrowing as he tried to process Tristan's words. I apologize, my lord, he said, his voice soft and uncertain, a hint of embarrassment coloring his tone. I meant no offense. His hand instinctively sought Margaery's, as if to steady himself, to regain the ease he had so often relied upon when surrounded by the comforts of his court and his queen's reassuring presence. But Margaery, ever poised, stepped in before the tension could thicken, her voice smooth and steady. What my husband means to say, she began, turning towards Tristan with an understanding smile, her hand resting delicately on Tommen's arm, is that the Princess Elia will be a great ruler, whether that is on her own or with someone by her side. Her tone was measured and diplomatic, carefully crafted to smooth over any potential ruffled feathers, both among the Martells and her own family. Her gaze softened as she looked at Tommen, her fingers gently brushing against his sleeve. It's a difficult thing to navigate, power and tradition, the expectations of a kingdom. She paused, her gaze sweeping briefly over Circe before settling back on Tristan. But in the end, it is the strength of the ruler, not how they came to the throne, that defines their reign. Tommen, looking somewhat relieved by Margaery's graceful intervention, nodded slowly, his gaze drifting towards the baby in Tristan's arms. Yes, of course, he added quickly, as if wanting to put the matter behind him. I can see that Elia will be a wise and strong ruler. His voice regained some of its usual warmth as he spoke, but Circe could tell he was still uneasy from the exchange. It was rare for him to find himself in such uncomfortable territory, but with Margaery's calming influence, he was quick to find his footing again. Margaery gave a slight smile, her eyes briefly meeting Circe's with a look that could almost be described as knowing. There was something subtly disarming in the way Margaery navigated these delicate moments, turning what could have been a point of contention into a quiet reaffirmation of her authority. A quiet reminder that she was the queen, and in matters of court, it was her diplomacy that would guide the ship. Indeed, Tristan replied, his tone returning to its customary warmth, though there was a quiet sharpness behind his words, as if he was keenly aware of the precariousness of the conversation. In Dorne, we know well that a ruler's true strength lies not in their title, but in the choices they make and the legacy they create. He glanced at Elia, who was still nestled in her arms, eyes fluttering softly. And I have no doubt that Elia will carry the weight of her ancestors with grace and strength, as they would expect. Cersei's eyes lingered on the little princess, still so small and delicate, her future resting on the winds of change. She wondered, not for the first time, whether the Martells truly understood the weight of what they professed. But then again, perhaps